Snow?
So we have a few late items that were circulated by email earlier today. I'll just run through them quickly. Item 3.2, the revised minutes from October 15th regular council. Councillor Morris just had a few typos, formatting changes. Item 5.1 D and C and D. Letters in regards to DBP 06, which is 971 Seaview Place. Items 5.2 A, B, and C in relation to DBP 12, 2019. Item 5.3, new business item, or business arising from minutes from CAO, Dennis back. And then items 12.6 E and F are just provided for information at the suggestion of Councillor Morris, just so that parts 1, 2, and 3 of the tax levy analysis are all on one council agenda.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to ask you before.
Sort of making sense. Okay, good. I'm glad that it finally got through. Anyhow, that's all.
All right, thank you very much. Anybody have anything else they'd like to add? Okay, so
Just somewhere, a few minutes about the House Sound Forum. So that
okay,
could be,
yeah. We're towards the end there.
yeah, we can put it like
And
10.5.
reports.
10.5 with the other meetings.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd like to add, I guess 10.6,
Yes.
a letter to our new MP elect.
Oh, yeah, good idea. 10.6. Letter to Patrick. All right. Okay, if that's good, approval of the agenda as amended. So moved. Thanks, David. And Sue Ellen is a second. And all in favor? Thank you. All right, public comments. Oh, what have you got?
We have two. First, Ryan and Monica Lauren regarding DDP 06.
Okay.
First of all, thanks for having us.
Pleasure. You can sit down there, relax.
No, I can sit down.
Pull up a chair.
The first time I've been accused of being a good guy. Happens in this room.
Hop yourself to another chair if you like.
That's sure. So it's been an 8-month process to get here, so we're thankful you're having us. A number of you came out to view the site a week or two ago and get a better sort of understanding of the site itself and the issue that we're talking about. We've gone through this process. It's been interesting. It's a big learning experience. This is my first build. I'm not a home builder by any stretch. Frankly, I was rather surprised that I passed my HPO exam to actually become an owner builder. And we went through the process and find ourselves here today. I don't think out of proactively trying to end up with a variance. It was through a series of unfortunate events, and I think maybe that's the theme for today's conversation. For us, we've been happily going through the process of engaging with our neighbors to try and find an equitable solution for the DVP process. And we're happy with the recommendation that staff has put forward, with two small little consideration points that we hope you take a look at. One is item 6, which is basically a time horizon on the application, which would require a deposit that's held or a bond held with the city for a growing season, so a year and a bit. Main reason is things change, circumstances change. I don't know where we'll be in a year. This has been a tenuous process between us and between our neighbors, and I just don't want to have to be tied down with something that I'm going to have to try and deal with a potential unknown in a certain amount of time. Would be item number 1. And then item number 2 is just the requirement for a security deposit. I think it's actually somewhat redundant. This process we've come around. Our planning was that we would take the original bond that we submitted with our BP to the city and use that for landscaping. We found ourselves in a place where we needed to get a variance, and unfortunately we haven't been able to do a refi with our bank because we don't have an occupancy permit, which has led to a whole slew of strange and wonderful financial implications. Bottom line is we need the bond back from the city in order to cash flow the recommendations that are in the DDP. The 5 or 6 points, I think we'll just rip through as quickly as possible. I know you're super busy. The number 1 is this was an incident. There was no malfeasance, there was no planning. As a first-time builder, the stupidest mistake I made in March of 2017 was to ask Conrad if I really needed a site survey of my forms, and he said no. And he said, go ahead and pour concrete, and I did. Unfortunately for us, we were 18 inches into the setback. Unplanned, there's no material gain, we don't gain any view, we don't get a bigger house. There's no reason why we would plan to do that. So it was an incident. I think there's also the other consideration that we want to just sort of bring to light is there seems to be some misunderstanding through this process. I followed to a T, and I worked with Tess about height restrictions before BP. We followed our zoning. We are under our FSR. If the house was 18 inches to the east of where it is today, we would not be above height. So we're actually looking for 18 inches into a setback, one corner that fades about the midpoint of the house. And we are, I would colloquially call it looking for a relaxation on average grade versus a height consideration. The height, physical height of the house does not change, whether we're 18 inches to the east or to the west. The theoretical height based on the average grade changes. So our grade changed and we found ourselves in this spot. The DVP, and I said this to staff early on, I was weary to go on this road, but because we're asking our community to submit comments on a fairly confusing topic. Height based on different grades, based on unusable space in the attic, a whole bunch of things, and this process inherently becomes an audit on the infractions that we're trying to remedy through the DVP. But what it's turned into within our neighborhood is a referendum on the design scheme of our house. And I'm not sure that's what the DVP process is about. We understand that the process is to remedy zoning or use issues. All of the other stuff, height, color, roofing, we submitted a signed off design scheme from Wolfgang, who has the covenant on the site. We tried to stick to the scheme as much as possible. And so the place that we find ourselves today is I think, it should be, anyway, in my opinion, less about the design elements and more about the physicality of the infraction. And I think that's one of the things that even staff's report back to council, mayor and council, is about issues of color, issues of materiality, and issues of landscaping, which we're happy to remedy. I think that's the big thing here. This house, at the moment for us, we have weathered a summer of an unlandscaped lot. I don't know how well you or how familiar you are with Cates Hill, but you get these tumbleweeds and thistles and all manner of jungle bush that's growing up there. Walking into our house for the past 7 months has been through 3 feet of weeds. So we would prefer to have had landscaped it. The photo package that I gave you, you'll notice that houses that have the benefit of landscape context tend to look smaller. And so one of the issues that has come up over and over is size and mass and all of those things. Again, we are, from an FSR perspective and from a massing perspective, well within the parameters set forth in the zoning and the bylaws. So we want to landscape it. In fact, our master ensuite bathroom does not have blinds. When I go into the bath, my neighbors can see me. The intent has always been to have a giant maple tree in front of that window. And so here we are today, wanting basically the same things. All we're looking for is, I think, a little bit of latitude and flexibility around this. This sort of is a bit of a 3/4 finished project. We want to get our OP so we can refinance and take that bond and go and do all of this great landscaping stuff. So I mean, that's our position. Is we're happy to have spent time to listen to our neighbors. It's been a somewhat embarrassing process. Frankly, I find myself embarrassed to be sitting in here today. I was embarrassed walking around to many of my neighbors, having to explain how this all happened. It was an exercise in humility and really just sort of trying to listen and understand to.
And friendships as well. My neighbors are my friends. Some of them can't even look at me in the eye anymore, so it's getting pretty toxic.
It's been an interesting process, to say the least. And I think the last thing that I would say is there's 75-ish homes on Kate's Hill. It's a very unique place on Bowen Island. I think the 8 or 9 letters that have come in with concerns represent a very, very small portion of our neighborhood. All the time we get people walking by saying, I love this home, I love the direction you guys went, I love that you tried to do something different. You know, on and on and on. And I think we all know that the people that are unhappy tend to be the people that respond to these kinds of processes. So the absence of comments from proactive and supporting neighbors and friends, I don't think it speaks to the unpopularity of our home. And again, frankly, if we're being completely objective, what we already hear and have tried to get through this entire process is 18 inches to one side and a height infraction that's caused by that. So we hope you guys take a look at some of the reference images that we put forth and consider those as you're making your decision moving forward.
I know one of the conditions were paint on here, and Ryan didn't mention it as much, but you know, there's a lot to think about in regards to whether this house should be lighter. With the landscaping, the house should melt into the environment, and we feel that if the house was a lighter color, it would actually look quite larger to the eye. So I just want that to be well thought out and considered.
And you know, it's part of the considerations we went through as we were planning this. We wanted a house. We were up at the top of Elron's Court for a long time, and our winter heating bills were becoming insane. We researched it and found out that a black, dark house sucks in more sunlight in the winter and keeps the house warmer. It's the same reason we have a metal roof. It's more environmentally friendly. Our roof is a recycled roof. I never thought of the notion that it would reflect. And you know, in retrospect, I apologize we have apologized to the one neighbor that does affect. It'll dull down with time. We've checked with the manufacturer, and so, yeah.
Okay. Appreciate that. We gotta kind of keep rolling.
Yeah.
But, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Robin Fenton, or anything?
Hello.
So I sent a 4-page letter earlier, which hopefully you've all had time to read. So I'm not going to read it verbatim, but I'm just going to hit the highlights and then some points at the end here. So as a project update, and of course I'm happy to, if any of you want to meet or have a chat, give you more information and share the feasibility study we did in the concept design. So happy to do that. We completed the feasibility stage, so we got funding for that from Van City at the beginning of the year. That was complete as of August, so that's what I'm happy to share. We submitted that to the feds, to CMHC for seed funding, and we just found out a couple of weeks ago that we got that funding. So we got $28,000 from them, and then Van City very graciously also topped us up with another $29,000 and change. So we've got about $60,000 for our next stage. In addition to that, as you know, we got $15,000 from the Community Foundation earlier in the year with your support. We applied together, and that was approved specifically for project funds, not operational. So we're doing very, very well in the project development funds. As I mentioned, you know, we've gotten just shy of $92,000 this year for this project in grants. So I think our time and effort has been very well spent in chasing those and doing the work to get those grants. I did do an outline, and I'm not sure that we want to go into every detail of all of the funding applications we've done with you guys for operational funds, but you know, it's been a challenge, and I think it's really because we don't quite fit in the sort of 2 boxes that you guys have for grants. And that's where we're at, and we really appreciated that in the summertime, I think it was in July, you kind of went, we got to find the money, and you found it, and you found $10,000 for us for this year, which is fantastic. So I'm hoping that something like that can be worked out again, because I know we're just not quite fitting in these two. The community grants were too big, and the multi-year, I get it, we're probably not there yet. We're just not, I understand the not wanting to commit, and the finance committee, I watched the video, and I get the hesitation to maybe commit to 4 years, so we're understanding of that. What we're wanting to ask, and what I've sort of outlined here, is could we come up with some sort of compromise, some sort of creative solution that could help us and help you, and we can keep moving forward. So our suggestion, and of course happy to discuss this, and I'll look forward to your discussion later in the agenda on this one, but perhaps in principle you could approve our 4-year application, and you could be approved for next year, for 2020, and then the funding would be in the budget. You'll find it. I appreciate that it's quite an ask, that I know that really the only funds this can come from is upping the tax rate, so I don't ask for that lightly. I understand that that's a burden. I really think this is worth it. I think Birch is worth it. We're working on affordable housing. I know all of you were passionate about it last year during the election. I think you still are. I think the community's in support of us, so I would really hope that they would support putting a little bit of a tax hike to help us keep doing the work that we're doing, because I know there are more grant funds out there for us, and literally it's like $1 million or more if we can get this project going. So an investment in Birch of some operational funds will bring, you know, folds and folds, I can't imagine, 10, 20 folds, whatever it is, of funds from the government sources back into the community. So that's our proposal. You guys, you know, tell us what you think. But yeah, if we could have, say in principle, 4 years approval, you approve us, you know, each year. So that's kind of the agreement, is that we come, we report to you, whatever the interval is, we report back whatever information you want, we can work on that requirement, and we kind of get year-to-year approvals. It saves us time having to continue to apply for grants, and it means we can actually put that time into finding other grant money, and we can put it into doing an update for you and for the community, because I'd love to be able to do more, a little bit more to have reports available to the community as well, because we're just short on time to do that. And a quick reminder, because I think I forgot to put it in my letter, is although I know for next year for sure it's an increase in the tax rate, just a reminder that MRDT tax is out there. So I know we don't know how much that is. It's a little bit of a, you know, we don't know yet, but it is out there. So I'm optimistic that that will bring in, you know, a reasonable amount of money for us and for tourism to share, or whatever that looks like. And I certainly hope if it's allocated for affordable housing, you think Birch will be a worthwhile organization to invest that money into. So that's it. And if you have any questions now, or I'm going to wait till the agenda item when you guys discuss it, but happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions?
Just a really quick one. Can you remind me what MRDT stands for? I know what it is.
Oh, sorry, is it the Municipal Regional Destination Tax? No. MRD. Regional District
Okay,
Tax.
I'm just making sure I'm on the right one.
Yeah,
That's
and
good.
it's the
Thank
one
you.
with the B&Bs.
Hotel rooms.
The hotel,
Okay, good. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Just to clarify, so
Yeah.
the funds you've been getting, they're all operational, they're all project-based, but none
Yeah.
of that can be allocated to us, is that correct?
None of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I did list out, and I want to save time, I did list out what we need
Yeah.
operational funds for, and just simply to exist as an organization, and to put the money into the grant writing and to do all of that stuff.
So all of the operational work is currently being done on a volunteer basis?
The board's doing volunteer work. I'm doing some of it. I mean, there was some funds, so that 10,000 we got, there was some of that allocated to me, about $500 or $700 a month, I'd have to check. So, you know, a lot of my time right now is on project stuff, but it's still, there's an amount of work to be done for administering the organization. And what we've realized, we're kind of past the startup phase, we feel, and I did make note of it, that we'll likely, if we get this operational funding, we'll likely be looking for like a part-time admin person, because I think they'll be a better value for the money we get and for the organization, rather than paying me to do administrative work. We'll try to find somebody else who can take on that organizational side of it.
Thank you.
All right. What about CMHC? I mean, you did get some funding from them.
Yeah, for project. Yeah, it's all project. Yeah, they were very specific. Some of the funders will give the organization some money because, of course, we have administrative costs just simply for the project, not just for operations. So Van City will allow that, and I think other funders, and maybe at future stages we will, because of course we have to attend meetings, we're, you know, the owner, right? So they acknowledge that, but this specific seed funding from CMHC, they specifically exclude that. It could basically be used for the consultants, the architects, you know, work on site, geotechnical engineers, reports, that kind of thing. So thankfully Van City has stepped in, they're fantastic, and they've been really supportive.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Robin.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Oh,
That's all.
that's all? Thank you. Okay, so the consent agenda. 3.10, I hope is going to speak to that.
I'm just gonna pull 3.10 and move it to items removed from the consent agenda. We just have to amend the sections of the community charter that we're closing the meeting under. So we'll deal with that when we get to that.
Okay. When are we going to deal with it? Sorry, hold.
I was suggesting under items removed from the consent agenda, just near the end.
Okay.
Section
Oh, yeah,
11.
okay. Perfect, thank you. David?
3.3?
3.3. Okay. And so,
3.9.
Yes, 3.9 as well.
and so those are going into section 11. Okay, anybody else? Great. So, recommendation that the council approve the items as outlined in the October 28, 2019 consent agenda as amended.
Yep, so moved.
Okay, David, Michael, thank you, all in favor. Okay, that's done, thank you. Sorry?
We just did.
We did.
Just there. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't hear you call.
Are you in favor?
Yes, but I didn't.
That's lovely. Okay, so delegations, Brian Green, step right up. Nice to see you, Brian.
Good afternoon, good evening, Bowen Council.
Yeah. He's Brian, City Manager of the Terminal Development of BC Ferries. Read the Horseshoe Bay Terminal Development Plan. Great,
Yes.
it's all yours.
Okay, great. Good evening, Bowen Council. My name is Brian Green, Manager of Terminal Development. Here tonight to provide an overview of our terminal development process and to share with you our draft concepts that we've developed for the terminal, which will help to create a long-term master plan for our terminal at Horseshoe Bay. Just for I talk about Horseshoe Bay, I just wanted to provide a bit of background on BC Ferries. When I first started at BC Ferries just over 3 years ago, I wasn't aware of some of the key facts and figures and the background to BC Ferries. So just a couple of slides on background. 2018, sorry, we moved 21 million passengers, just over 8 million vehicles. We have 47 terminals, 25 routes. I think it's one of the biggest employers in BC with just over 5,000 employees now. And also we've got a very ambitious capital plan coming up over the next 12 years where we are wanting to replace our ageing fleet of vessels and also improve our terminals. Just in terms of structure of BC Ferries, BC Ferries is a private, independent managed company, essentially a service provider to the province. We have a 60-year contract with the province with service levels and fees negotiated every 4 years. And we have a BC Ferries Commissioner that holds BC Ferries accountable. Moving on to Horseshoe Bay, just wanted to share with you a few key facts and figures about the terminal and how it provides a significant benefit to the local and regional economy. So in fiscal 2019, we had just over 11,000 departures. We had vehicle throughput of, and this is departures from Horseshoe Bay, so you can essentially double these figures for both departures and arrivals, but we had just over 1.4 million vehicles departing Horseshoe Bay, just over 900,000 foot passengers, and in terms of total passenger throughput, just over 3.7 million passengers departed Horseshoe Bay. We also have just over 500 employees based at the terminal. and we paid in 2018 just over $400,000 in tax to the districts of West Yorkshire for the terminal. So we developed a 5-phase engagement process to help us develop our long-term development plan for the terminal that began in early 2018. This included a series of workshops, online engagement, and meetings with key stakeholders, our customers and the community at large. We're now in phase 4, which is the design phase, and where we are now at a stage where we'd like to share our draft concepts of what the terminal could look like in the future. The concepts have been developed to sort of respond to 3 main issues. The terminal is at capacity. We have ageing infrastructure that needs to be replaced. Much of the terminal was built in the 1960s. And we also need to respond to future technology and traffic patterns which are changing and need to respond to that change in a positive way. So given these issues and budget constraints, we've developed concepts which take a phased approach to responding to the key issues and the design drivers which were developed with public input. Phase 1 very much centres on operational efficiencies and replacing ageing infrastructure, and I've got a few renderings that show those concepts in the next few slides, but essentially these improvements in phase 1 focus on operational infrastructures, realignment of the berth infrastructure, creation of a second exit road to allow simultaneously unloading and loading of vessels, elevation of the exit lanes, and essentially replacement of much of the infrastructure that was built in the 1960s, which currently doesn't meet BC building code from a seismic code perspective, so needing to focus on those issues. But also, phase 1 doesn't look at the passenger terminal building, given that that building was built in 2002. We need to ensure that when we make short-term decisions that we're planning for the long term, but we also don't want to be seen to be replacing assets that still have significant life left in them, and therefore phase 2 focuses more on the foot passenger building, and phase 1 on that infrastructure that needs replacing. So just in terms of next few slides show a few renderings that show those proposed changes. So here's a sort of an overview of the phase 1. Phase 1 is creation of a second exit road, which would essentially be built into the cliffside. Is that the point? Yeah. So we have a second exit road, which will be built to the cliffside to allow the loading and unloading of vessels, particularly 2 vessels. So that's the current bottleneck at the moment in the terminal. It's not possible to unload 2 vessels at the same time, so a second exit road would allow us to do that. We also want to elevate the exit lanes to go over Keith Road, so that Keith Road would become a 2-way road and would allow traffic to move much easier in and out of the village. That would remove the traffic light intersection and therefore allow vessels to unload more efficiently and quickly. We're also proposing a new foot passenger walkway, a widened walkway, which would be much wider than the current walkway. It would be enclosed, it would have moving sidewalks in it, much like you would see at an airport, to move passengers quickly from the foot passenger building down to a new centralised waiting lounge, and essentially 3 new berths, which would be pushed out to give us a bit more circulation space under that elevated holding area that we currently have, where it's very constrained at the moment, quite sharp corners, and therefore by pushing the berths out we'd get much more better circulation space down at the close to the berths. And as you can see in this phase, we're retaining the foot passenger building, showing here a potential to put a second storey on that building. Given that the control tower has been relocated from the vehicle holding area, this could be a new control tower, but also showing a new canopy in front of that foot passenger building to provide some shelter and shade for foot passengers who are awaiting transit. Phase 2 would build on phase 1, but focus on sense of arrival, sense of place, better integration of the terminal into the village, and creation of a transportation hub. So that would be about creating an accessible plaza, a new foot passenger building, integration of the terminal into the village. You know, currently the terminal turns its back on the village. It essentially looks like a a prisoner of war camp, as what one customer described it, in terms of barbed wire fences around a large vehicle holding area, and therefore doesn't integrate with the village well, it doesn't integrate with the waterfront park. So we want to very much focus on that centre of arrival, that centre of place, and create a much more transportation mobility hub, particularly for foot passengers arriving and departing the terminal. So here you can see how phase 2 would build on phase 1 with a new terminal building, providing better transition and integration with the terminal. We've got this new foot passenger building with a green roof, which fronts into the village, which better integrates into the proposed new waterfront park that the district has plans for. A new public accessible plaza that integrates the park space into the terminal. The closure of Bay Street would allow that to happen, so that traffic would come up here and then onto the Keith Road, which will be a two-way road, rather than currently, which the current Bay Street then goes around the back of the terminal for vehicles to access Highway 1. And a much more emphasis on essentially creating a better customer experience for foot passengers travelling through the terminal and onto transit. So just zooming into that new terminal building, here you can see how that new building integrates with the village, integrates with into the waterfront park, into a new public plaza, increased transit bays to better integrate transit into the terminal. So we've been working closely with TransLink and the District of West Vancouver and BC Transit to see how big this space needs to go in terms of connecting better transit. And then passengers would alight from the transit and then be taken up a series of escalators onto the moving walkways to that new foot passenger walkway to the foot passenger lounges, which would overlook the berths. And then essentially a view looking north to an upgraded vehicle holding area, replacement of that elevated holding area, creation of a second exit road, which will be built into the cliffside, and then would join just after Keith Road with the existing exit lanes, which would also be elevated to go over Keith Road. And then looking south, the intent is to rebuild and realign the three berths to improve efficiency. Again, those berths were built in the late 60s and therefore due for replacement, and there's an opportunity to replace those to get better efficiencies through new technologies in those ramps and berths. You can also see the foot passenger walkway, which would lead to the centralised waiting lounge overlooking the three berths and the Hayre Sound. And then moving to the street level, here's the new terminal building, trying to improve and increase the number of transit stalls and make it as easy and simple to access through the terminal and onto the vessels. The intent is that you would get off the bus, buy a ticket, taking that escalator up to that foot passenger walkway with moving sidewalks, and walk along to the centralised waiting lounge. And then looking south to a new plaza area, and showing how that would connect from the park, which would be here, into the closure of Bay Street, which it would be there essentially. So it would close Bay Street and create a much more public plaza with some commercial retail space, and which then connects into the terminal. And so, the next steps are we would refine the concepts. We've just completed the public engagement, which closed on Friday. We've so far had around 2,500 surveys completed online. We had about 5,000 views of the website and the online engagement. So we would then revise the concepts based on that feedback. We would then draft our terminal development plan, which will essentially be our master plan, our document that will then guide our plans for the terminal in years to come. And then we would get into prelim design, detail design, as each phase is taken forward into construction. And as we get into that prelim design, there'll be further engagements with our key stakeholders in the communities on those prelim designs. And we'll also be reporting back to stakeholders on the final concepts and share that final master plan once it's been approved by our executive. And you can obviously find out more information at that web address, and we'll be posting updates to that web page going forward. I'd just like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come speak with you tonight to share our process and our concepts with you this evening. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, David?
Brian, thank you for coming and appreciate some of the parts of this, making it more friendly to the community and more attractive and not like the barrier, the wall. But I have to say I'm extremely disappointed overall. We were involved, some of us, with the transportation group on Bowen, were involved in some of the work that went on over the last couple of years. And we were hoping for quite a different approach. We recognized that this is a 50-year, you're looking forward 50 years. And the last 50 years, basically, we did the same thing, but more and bigger and more and bigger and more and bigger. And that's sort of what I see here. We've got, you mentioned some of the drivers, new technologies. You should also add climate change onto that, where we've got governments saying that we should be carbon neutral by 2050. And here you've got something that's completely organized around cars. And I recognize you've got to improve transit, but nevertheless the transit's way the heck over here, where you've got even longer to go, although moving sidewalk I didn't know about until just now, even longer to go to where you'd actually catch. So the priority is completely for cars and not for transit. Whereas if it was for transit, you would have the buses go right down to the bottom, sort of like catching the sea bus going across to the North Shore, where you just arrive and you walk onto it, rather than have a 10-minute rule that really makes people not want to take transit because there's a good chance you're going to miss your boat. Also, the ferry commissioner and we talked about a hub that would be a hub between various forms of transportation, where you've got shared and autonomous vehicles on one side and foot passenger service on both. But I don't see anything about foot passenger service here. And I know the ferry commissioner has talked about that from a climate change perspective. And I looked at your numbers. You're moving nearly 1 million people in just about a third million cars. So your foot passengers are almost as much as your cars, and you've designed something that puts cars way ahead of foot passengers. So I'm sorry, I'm very disappointed, and I hate to be so negative, but that's, I don't think this reflects the feedback that we were given to the group that was here a year or so ago.
Okay, yeah, and that's, in terms of, we definitely want to, the focus of phase 2 is very much about growing foot passengers and making it easier to take transit. The part of the issue though we have is with that existing foot passenger building that was built in 2002, it still has significant life, and therefore we don't want to just demolish that existing building to put in more transit stalls, to put in a new terminal building, when that building we're still essentially paying a mortgage on that building, and therefore we don't want to be wasting money demolishing an asset to replace it with a new asset, acknowledging that we wanted to get to a stage where we want to move more people with transit, and therefore that's why the terminal building, passenger building, is in phase 2, which is 10 plus years out, I would say, in terms of getting to that stage. I guess we've been working closely with Transit, BT Transit, particularly the District of West Vancouver, on the design of that transit stalls, in terms of ensuring that we are planning for the number of stalls that Transit thinks they will be having in the future, and that design reflects the number of stalls that they think that they will need. We've also been working with BT Transit in regards to the potential new service from Whistler down to Vancouver to ensure that there's space for them. Obviously I'm a professional planner, and climate change is the greatest issue that is facing us, and from a planning perspective. However, I need to caveat that by saying that unfortunately our customers, we have seen over the last 12 months a growing number of vehicle customers. That number is still growing. The number of people who are travelling by vehicle is still growing, and therefore at this point in time we still need to plan for that number of vehicles going forward, and particularly when we've got designing new major vessels that will be coming on board, that they take a long time to plan, they have a long lifetime. However, the new major vessels are being designed so that in the future, that where we've got a car deck, they could be reconfigured to take more foot passengers or more foot passenger lounges in the future. So we are trying to be flexible in the future, that we are designing with that future in mind, but it's that, I guess, that chicken and egg situation. What comes first? Do you design the terminal so that there's just foot passenger ferries and therefore that nobody can arrive by vehicle, or do you still try and plan for what the actual numbers are? And therefore, that's a very difficult situation, I guess, in terms of how to plan for those eventualities when, to be honest, we don't really know what is going to happen around the corner. We know we need to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. We know that there's some serious things that need to happen in the next 12 years to avoid a climate catastrophe. But from our planning perspective, based on the numbers that we're seeing and the forecast growth in numbers, we at this point in time have to plan for those numbers. And I hope that we get to phase 2 much quicker than we do because of the trends that we are seeing, and whether that comes from the provincial government, but essentially BC Ferries is a service provider to the province. If the province wants to have foot passenger ferries on all 3 routes of Horseshoe Bay, then we would do that. That would be a provincial government decision, not a BC Ferries decision.
I appreciate, I'll just be a moment longer. I appreciate you've got, to figure out how to plan for something that is so unknown is obviously really, really difficult. And so I appreciate all that. And I appreciate also that you've got a building that exists and you don't need to knock it down when it's still got some life left in it. But at the same time, 30 years from now is pretty soon, and any capital that we put in that's 30 years long should be zero by the end of that, which is, and yet you're building a very expensive, the blasting you're going to be doing to take part of that rock to build that exit. Maybe there's something we can do to get buses down there instead of cars, I don't know.
Yeah, and some of that may come out. We've done some early costings as we get into more detail, and we know what the true cost is. Then that, somebody might say, oh, well, actually, what is cost benefit? We need to do that cost benefit analysis of what do we gain by that second exit route from a cost benefit analysis in terms of both moving more vehicles or in terms of alleviating GHG issues through getting more efficiency and getting more vehicles out of the terminal quickly. So that will be part of that prelim design and some of the further detailed studies that needs to happen as we go forward.
I'll let others. So I'll go on for a while.
Thank you for the presentation, and I'm delighted to hear about the moving sidewalks or the moving walkways, because I think that'll help pedestrians that are already unable to use the ferries, elders who can't do that long hike because it actually is sort of from down here in the Cove, there's a walk,
Yeah.
then you rest on the ferry, then you walk. And from children and people with strollers and obviously all kinds of accessibility features, I think the moving sidewalk should help with that. Secondly, I'm wondering about climate as well. So I'm thinking adaptation. Last winter there were storms in January that stopped ferry traffic, even some of the routes that usually run like back and forth to Bowen. So I'm wondering, I didn't hear you talk about sea level rise and storm surges, and are you building that into the plans? And the third thing, so 2 questions. One is about the storm surge and sea level rise. The second one is about being able to charge electric ferries, because we know that the ferries that are coming are adaptable, as you said, and one of the ways they're adaptable is that they could be converted to become all electrical. We know that other ferries in other parts of the world at the scale and the distances like this do function. So are you planning to plan in the infrastructure for charging ferries? Those are my 2 questions.
So just in terms of the first question, yeah, we have done a sea level rise storm surge study, so we know we have got some information from that study, and therefore when we go forward prelim design, it will be taking into account that study that we've done to ensure that any assets that, some assets we might want to just allow them to flood basically, and some assets that we don't want to flood, ensuring that we're taking essentially a precautionary principle of moving any assets that we think shouldn't get wet, if you like, up the land, so that they're out of that storm surge sea level rise area. But other areas that potentially they flood a few times a year and the terminal's closed down, but we have storm surge inundation, that could be fine. So it's how we then use that study. So we have done a study, and that will be part of that used to help inform any prelim design that goes forward, particularly the berth infrastructure. One of the things it's worth bearing in mind from a sea level rise perspective, though, is that our berths, we can plan to some extent the height of those berths, but until it actually happens, what we can take a precautionary approach, but if we then plan, 1 metre, 2 metre higher than, and say it doesn't happen at 2 metres, then that infrastructure won't work basically. So we're almost like a reactionary in terms of
Got it. I had
some
just
of the infrastructure.
assumed from what we had heard at the Transportation Advisory Committee that the berths were already at the maximum height.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to hear that you were planning for that.
Yes,
so
we
that's
definitely
great.
have
Okay.
we've done a study, sea level rise study, and that will be used to help
All
inform
right.
that.
I was just surprised not to hear anything about climate, so I thought
Yeah.
I'd better check.
Yep.
And then the other one was about the capacity to charge electric fares.
Yes, so that will be part of it. So we have been working with BC Hydro across all our network about how do we get fast charging, or how do we get essentially more electricity to those terminals. So we are working closely with BC Hydro on that. Obviously not me personally, but obviously other teams within BC Ferries are working closely with BC Hydro to look at how we can get essentially more power to the terminals to help charge ships once they arrive in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Maureen?
Thank you for your presentation. And I've got 2 questions. The first one may be easier to answer. It's just, I wonder if you could describe what the experience of a user would be in this new model, from driving or taking a bus down, maybe start with driving. Would we, for example, still have the bunker where we park as drivers? That would still be in place?
Yeah, so essentially from a vehicle perspective, then what we're proposing is to essentially replace that what's called the Langdale elevated holding area. So that will be replaced, but built to essentially to current BC building code, which will be seismic upgraded, and also it will be essentially slightly bigger, I guess, because what we're proposing is to push the berth slightly out. Because at the moment, one of the issues we have underneath when you're waiting for the Bowen Island ferry is there's lots of columns, but also not much circulation space. So by pushing the berths out and by holding the vehicle lanes back, we have much more better circulation space at that lower area to allow a better waiting area for those people with dogs or with bicycles in that area, but also from a vehicle passenger perspective, that it'd be a much more essentially a better experience waiting underneath that area. And then from a foot passenger perspective, I guess this slide illustrates that it's trying to create that seamless transition from departing a bus up to into a ticket area, up escalators, up to the moving sidewalks. That moving sidewalk, that walkway, that covered walkway would be fully enclosed. It would have moving sidewalks, but also be wide enough that you can still get a golf cart as well down the side, for particularly like say airports, but again for people with mobility issues that can easily access the berths. So it's trying to create that seamless transition particularly for foot passengers, but also for vehicle passengers as well, in terms of replacing of some of those aging assets down close to the berths with a new elevated vehicle holding area and 3 new berths.
Would the plaza be accessible to people who were waiting for the ferry, or is the plaza still external to the terminal itself?
Yeah, so the plaza area will be outside the fair paid zone in terms of current thinking, or current from a concept perspective, that public plaza area would be outside of the fair paid zone. So it will be creating that transition between the village to the plaza area, and then you would enter the fair pay zone through either through the foot passenger area, through some doors here, or as a vehicle passenger that we need to access the terminal and show a ticket again, similar to what happened today, but it will be part of there'll be a fair pay zone area outside of that public plaza area.
Okay. And then just my last question is, what are your current thoughts on a management plan during construction? Because this is presumably going to be quite disruptive.
Yes, I think that's going to be the challenge with this terminal, is how do we maintain operation of 3 berths and 3 services whilst trying to replace those assets, and that when we got to that stage, that's to be part of that prelim design. That's part of the how we actually construct this. It's not as if we can close this terminal for 12 months, rebuild it, and then reopen it up. We still need to maintain service to the 3 routes, and therefore how do we do that is going to be one of the the challenges that we still need to grapple with to some extent. We've given it a little bit of thought, but and we've done it with berths, and that's the advantage with the 3 berths that we're showing there is that they have 3 floating berths, so essentially they can be built off-site and then just be floated in, and we would build 1 berth at a time, a bit like with what happened at Langdale. So from the berth perspective, we think that is manageable, but when we get to the elevated holding area and some of those assets, how do we replace that whilst maintaining operation is always challenging for BC Ferries. How do we maintain operation whilst construction is always difficult, and we'll need to come up with a plan to do that.
Maybe I could just, one more thing, maybe just come back to David's point about the passenger ferries. And I think you were referring to passenger ferries in addition to the
not replacing
regular
it.
ferries, so not as an alternative.
I believe the Minister of Transportation is holding some visioning workshops in the next 6 months. I read in the paper last week that there's some visioning workshops about a future vision for BC Ferries, and I've noticed that in that mandate there was talk about foot passenger ferries, and I'm sure that BC Ferries will participate in that exercise with the Minister.
I guess my point is that the last time we had a major disruption was the midlife refit of the Queen of Capilano. And there were a number of good things that came from that, including the express bus that goes downtown. If you've got a challenging situation, this may be a point where looking at a passenger ferry for that 1 year period when you are in serious construction, it could take some Bowen Island cars out of the mix and help alleviate some of the pressures during that period. So just a thought.
Quickly.
With the anticipated life of this terminal when built is how long?
When it's rebuilt, sorry.
When it's rebuilt?
Well, until essentially we're a leaseholder to the province, and until the province wants to, we would
Change it.
until the province changes that lease or doesn't want a terminal at Horseshoe Bay. Essentially, we've got a 60-year contract with the province, and we're a leaseholder to the province. The land's run by BCTFA, and we have a remit to provide ferry service in accordance with that contract on those 3 routes. So until the province changes that, there will be a terminal at Horseshoe Bay.
So your design anticipates then, shall we say, 60 years?
Yeah.
Okay. The 3 destinations, it is anticipated 3 destinations for the next 60 years?
Yes, yeah, there's no, unless the province changes that. BC Ferries is planning for 3 routes from this terminal to serve Nanaimo, Bowen Island and Langdale from this terminal for the foreseeable future.
Well, I tell you what, I hope they tell you they're going to change their mind before you design it.
Is that it, Mike?
Yeah.
Great. Allison?
Well, I just was having trouble figuring out how this second exit road was going to get onto the highway without a traffic light. Since you said that Keith Road was going to get, traffic light was going to disappear. You haven't got the slides, I've been looking at the ones on the website, but you haven't.
Yes, it has it on our website. So essentially, you can just see that's Keith Road here, and the elevated exit lanes, and then the second exit road would merge just south of Keith Road, essentially.
So it's going to merge in?
It would merge, yes.
Because looking at the design, it's almost merging on a left turn, so it seems very difficult.
Yes, so they would merge, just north. If you look at the plans, there is don't have it in this slide deck, but if you go onto the website, there is a couple of slides which show the road network in phase 1 and 2.
We'll have another discussion because I'm looking at those slides.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah. But so essentially Keith Road would be would become a 2-way road. It's currently only a 1-way road into the village. That would become a 2-way road to allow traffic exiting the village. Would go underneath that into that tunnel, and then would merge onto the highway on that side of the highway, as well as then allowing vehicles to access the village without being stopped by a traffic light.
And no traffic light for the ferry traffic exit?
That's correct, yes. Yeah.
Okay, we've got to sort of move along here. Thank you very much, Brian. Just last question, high-level timelines, very high level.
So the intent is to try and get a plan approved in the spring.
Yep.
And then we will need to start going through some approvals with the District of West Vancouver because we're not a Crown Corporation anymore. We have to comply with municipal bylaws, so it's likely that we'll have to go through a rezoning process, given that much of these lands are zoned single-family residential from when we were a Crown Corporation. That zoning has not been updated, so we'll need to go through a major rezoning exercise with the District of West Vancouver. So the intent is then to try and start phase 1 within the next 5 years, essentially, and then phase 2, 10 plus years.
Yeah, okay.
I also always mentioned that we also, I work in the management of terminal development. We've been doing a number of terminal development plans across the network, and the intent is also to do a TDP, a terminal development plan for Snow Cove Terminal as well in the near future. I think we're hoping to start that within the next 6 months, and therefore we'll be back across to start that process in probably in the new year sometime. But essentially, Snow Cove, we don't own any land at the terminal there. We have a very, I think we only own the trestle, is my understanding, and the marine infrastructure, and then essentially becomes a Bowen Island road. So we'll be working closely with your colleagues, your staff in planning and transportation to work together on how we can come up with any future solutions of how we can improve that terminal.
Good. Yeah, it's still pretty early days. So you wouldn't consider putting a passenger ferry in, like a TransLink ferry type thing, or just a passenger-only ferry berth in there?
Well, what we're trying to do is rebuild the 3 berths so they're interoperable, so that any vessel can use any berth.
Oh, okay.
And therefore, it could be that it could be a passenger ferry in the future. That's and that's the current weakness of our terminal there, is that every vessel has its own individual berth, and when there's an issue with one berth, that causes issues. And what we want to do is replace 3 berths with 3 interoperable berths that any vessel that comes in can use any berth for flexibility.
All right. Well, this is a massive project. There's no question we're going to settle everything here in half an hour by any stretch of the imagination. So, and we've got time to talk about it. And if we get any resolutions out of council or something like that, we'll send them over to you. And
Please do, please do. I'm always open to.
I was receptive, I'm sure.
Definitely, yes.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, thank you very much, Brian. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thanks for the questions.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye for now. Next up, Jody Lorenz.
Hello.
When you're ready.
I'm very cognizant that we're already behind schedule, so I'll try to be as short as sweet as possible. For those that don't know me, I'm Jody Lorenz. I'm the Administrative Manager of Tourism Bowen Island. Normally, we're here giving our report, our Visitor Services report in the springtime. But we have, as you know, recently applied for core funding, so it seemed more relevant that we give our 2019 Visitor Services report now, which did go out, and I hope people had a chance to read it. So just a few things I just want to sort of emphasize, just reiterate that, because there is often some confusion. Tourism Bowen Island is a registered, non-profit, member-based organization. We operate both as a destination marketing and as a destination management organization. Just to be very clear that the funding that BIM provides us goes specifically towards destination management. And very specifically, that's to operate the Visitor Services Visitor Center. We received $20,000 this past year, which was great. And I also want to mention that Tourism Bowen Island Association is recognized by Destination BC as the official destination marketing and management organization, and we work in partnership with them, and they also provide us with some funding. Visitors, of course, come to Bowen Island all year round. Our current funding level of $20,000 only enables us to operate the visitor center for 5 months, essentially May through September. Our core funding application, we tried to state quite clearly the increasing need, that there's more visitors coming throughout the year, and therefore we really strongly recommend that we provide visitor services throughout the year into the shoulder and winter season. And therefore our application was for the first year $38,000, and then the second year was for $44,000, and that was to improve and extend our visitor services. TBI has operated, here we go. TBI was formed in 2015, and we've operated the Visitor Center from 2016 to 2019. And the numbers, there's comparison across there, and you can see a steady increase from our first year in 2016 to the most recent year in 2019, where we captured over 31,000 visitors, which is a 47% increase over this past year. That is predominantly due to the way that our staffing went this year. It was kind of a mixed blessing. We had a hard time finding 2 university students to start in May, and therefore we actually had, we went through 4 students this summer. So we had 2 extra summer students. That enabled us to have the visitors kiosk open more, and we're capturing way more people when we have both those, because the kiosk and the center open, because we're getting people as they disembark the ferry on both sides. We recently received from BC Ferries, after asking for many years, to have a breakdown of the experience card users from the full fare users, working on the assumption that the experience card users are going to be residents and the full fare users are going to predominantly be visitors. So we just got those stats a couple weeks ago. I've been working them out, and then I just have put in this comparison that shows, based on that breakout, a comparison of what we're capturing over the years from May through September. So once again, that shows a steady increase. It shows the first year was when Bowen Arts Council operated the visitor center. Shows that they were capturing at just over 7%. We went to 8%. Second year was over, I can't read from here, 13%, 17%. And then we're estimating this most recent year, partly because of the staffing, over 30% capture rate, which I think is really good. So visitor services is on the street frontline destination management. As I said, we work in partnership with Destination BC. They're a Crown corporation. They are the body that manages tourism throughout BC. So we work with them in close partnership, and we apply industry best practices. Visitor services is on the street. We capture people, we give them maps, we give them information. We tell them about trails. We do economic development by connecting them to restaurants, to accommodation, to activities. We help with ferry marshalling on a Sunday afternoon or a Saturday afternoon when the day trippers are heading home. The staff at that kiosk, they're telling people how, not that they don't have to buy a ticket or return ticket, that how to line up in the ferry, and then when they get caught, as it always happens, that they can't get onto the ferry, we have our staff going over and saying, hey, sorry, you can't park here, you have to go around there. So we're on the street, we're doing the destination management, we're directing people to beaches that have washrooms as opposed to ones that don't. We're encouraging people to use the transit. So we're on the street doing that. The higher level, which is what we're also recommending, which was outlined in the report, is that tourism to BC keeps growing and growing. The context here is that tourism is in 2017 there were approximately 21.6 million overnight visitors to BC who spent 12.3 billion. BC tourism industry generated revenue of 18.4 billion in 2017, an increase of 8.4% over 2016 and a 41.3% over 2007. In 2017, tourism contributed more to the gross domestic product than any other primary resource industry. That's mining, that's logging, whatever. So we are an island, but we're not in a bubble, and we are obviously influenced by tourism coming to BC, tourism coming to the Vancouver region. We are the doable Gulf Island. So it's naive to think that we shouldn't be planning and addressing. At Tourism Bowen Island, we're very cognizant that the visitors come for the very same reason that residents live here. That's in appreciate nature, we want to preserve it, we like the quiet, the solitude, the wellness. And so we want to work towards recognizing all these principles and helping to develop a community-based destination plan that recognizes this, that supports that, but then also in a healthy way supports economic development, because economic development is happening in the province, in the region, and it's tourism-based. And even just our visitor center, as I said, we provided jobs for 4 students this past summer, just the way the funding went, as opposed to 2. So that's also economic development and training. Hopefully a couple of those students will come back this summer. So moving forward, I did have some recommendation in there. Once again, destination management things. Washrooms are huge. Potable water, water fountain, water filling station. We're trying to get people not to buy bottled water. We have to provide those resources. We have people with mobility issues coming to the visitor center and they need to use the washroom. And it's really hard. We can't tell them to go walk over to the ferry terminal to go use the washroom there. I'm very grateful we had Melanie Mason, who is a former counselor, helping us in September, and she wasn't aware of the destination management issues, and she has a total new perspective of how important the visitor services is and how integral they are to the health of the community and moving forward to economic development. So washrooms, water, we want to work on a development management plan. As I mentioned, we did apply for core funding, and Raj is going to make a recommendation about our multi-year core funding. A logical way for us to facilitate these plans and providing destination management is the MRDT, which is the Municipal Regional District Tracts. Traditionally, it has always gone towards supporting tourism, tourism management, tourism marketing. They recently changed it to include B&Bs and to also allow for affordable housing. I recognize we need affordable housing, so we have suggested and proposed that we split that. We'd really like to get moving on that, and that's a good way to provide funding to manage the visitors that come here, is to use actual tax revenue that's coming from them as they spend in accommodations to go towards funding this. I just came across a quote as I was coming here, because I have said that we're trying to extend visitor services. If somebody around the world has heard of Bowen Island, if they're coming from someplace else, doesn't matter if it's November, if it's January, doesn't matter if it's sunny or rainy, they're still going to come. I was just on TripAdvisor, and here's a quote from Ian Dempster from the United Kingdom that came here in 2019. His quote was, "Quaint, very small visitor center that also serves as a health advice center. The lady inside just said, take brochures as season has ended," and she was the health advisor. So that's gone up onto TripAdvisor. That's not exactly the way that we want our visitor services to be. We do have self-serve visitor services. If somebody goes to the cottage, they can get maps, they can get brochures, they can get ferry schedules. But ideally, we would like to be able to provide better visitor service extended and planned for these kinds of things. So on behalf of Tourism Bowen, I thank you very much for your time and consideration. And we're really looking forward to working with the new economic development staff member and with the economic committee and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Business arising from the minutes and the chow. Thank you. Island Community Planner, redevelopment variance permit for 971 CB Place.
We're going slide 3 on this item. So this development variance permit application has come to council twice before, has been deferred, and now is coming back for actual consideration. And the deferrals have been due to the number of comments we received and the nature of the comments from the surrounding neighbors. The predominant issue or concern was around the appearance of overheight and excessive massing of the house. And the applicants, over the past several weeks, the applicants have come forward with a landscaping proposal specifically to address the appearance of height and massing. And that's included in the staff report. Essentially, we're looking at a screening of cypress trees and tall maple trees. The neighbors had a chance to review this proposal, and they would also like to see, in addition to the landscaping, a change in the exterior house color as well as window trimming. So those conditions have been drafted. Staff has included them in the report for your consideration, but they are not actually in the draft permit at this point. So the draft permit, as recommended to council, includes the landscaping proposal.
Just the landscape proposal, correct. Okay. Is that it?
That's it.
Thank you. Okay, questions?
Okay, just a quick one on the landscaping, sorry.
Sure.
Emma, there was, in one of the letters said, oh, we didn't, from the neighbors, we didn't get time to look at this landscaping proposal. Is this one, or is this a subsequent one?
It
or-
is this one.
Okay.
So at the time, the proposal was submitted from the applicant on the Thursday, so not this past Thursday, but Thursday before. And generally, the staff submission deadline for CAO review of reports is the Friday. I did tell the neighbors that I would try to get an extension, but with everything that was going on, at the time, I couldn't get a confirmed extension. So I told them that they can supply their comments to me by Friday for sure. It will be incorporated in the report. Otherwise, they could always address mayor and council directly with a letter. And many of them felt that was not enough time. Although I did tell them they could submit comment to mayor and council up to the time of the meeting tonight.
Okay, we haven't received any other comments about the landscaping specifically.
Not with the landscaping,
Yeah, there was one letter from the association, I believe.
right? Yes, yeah, we got that on table A. Sue Ellen?
I'm a bit confused about the trim. I'm looking at the letter from Jennifer Hall and Peter Robinson, and the third paragraph down says, from what they've determined, that the house hadn't been built as per the building permit. In particular, the house that was signed off had trim around the windows. I'm just quoting from this letter. And however, and then she says, once the building permit is issued based on approved design, is it the responsibility of the municipality to enforce? That's my question.
So I've replied to that letter, the author of that letter. The land use bylaw does not have any design requirements for Kate's Hill. The building permit is issued based on compliance with land use bylaw regulations and the BC Building Code.
Right, and the rest is the covenant with Bowen. Gotcha. Thank you.
Allison?
I certainly would not support adding repainting of the house. I was quite, I actually don't find it an offensive color. And having a black car, I know how warm it gets in the summertime. Same with a white car with a black roof. So from the heat basis, and metal roofs are definitely not a concern to me. I am concerned about us requiring them to plant cypress trees and yew trees because of, they're not tall fire smart plantings, and I'm rather surprised that, everything that's going on with us trying to be a fire smart community, the maple tree's fine, but I would be unhappy with us mandating trees that aren't considered fire smart.
The yews are meant to be more of a hedge, capped at about 4 feet.
That would be better, but it is still flammable. But the cypress trees grow to be,
6-7 feet,
yeah,
or that's the intended height.
I was gonna say.
yeah, we've got pruned
Yes,
to bits, yeah.
Okay, back to you, David.
So I agree with Allison about the paint, but I mean, I'm not an expert at landscaping, and I would want to make sure that the landscaping plan was, did do what we're asking it to do, which is to, bring down the appearance of the house and calm things down. And, so I like the idea of a landscape plan, and I know that the owners like the idea of a landscape plan. I just want to make sure it works so that the neighbors are happy. And I simply have not enough information, and I guess I'd like some clarification from the neighbors or from an expert, from someone that says, yeah, this is a good landscaping plan and it's not going to burn the house down and so on. So that's all I'm looking for, a really good landscaping plan, but I don't have enough information here. And so I'd just like to have that tied into the resolution in some way or another.
Okay.
The landscaping plan has been reviewed and supported by Green State Enterprises, and they are a certified arborist.
Okay.
I guess the owner and operator. So the trees are viable for the site and for the purpose in terms of the height. But they are not a landscape designer, so your concern is understandable, and some of the neighbors have voiced the same concern.
Anybody else? I've got some comments, obviously, because I built some stuff on Bowen. I don't know how we got here. There was a mistake somewhere in the correlation, which the proponent alluded to, which was correct. The massing of the house is legal. It's absolutely legal. I think one of the reasons it stands out so badly is because there is no landscaping around the house, and I think landscaping would certainly mitigate the mass part of it. I also believe that, I don't know if you call black a natural color or not, but there seems to be a bit of an issue here that there's, if you look all around Catesville, they're all the same sort of style of houses, and then this style is a little bit different. And I think that's what one of the biggest objections that people have is A, the massing, and B, that it's not the style that they would prefer in there. But apparently it was allowed. That building concept was approved by the local Bowen properties. Now, I think there should have been some trim around the windows. It's extremely difficult to do now. I'm not concerned with the roof, the 6 inches on the top, and which could have been mitigated by that shift in the actual property. I also believe that, but if you wanted to take 6 inches off the top of the roof, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference to anybody's sight lines anywhere. So I think that's kind of a useless operation. What I would like to see, and I don't know how we get there, but I would like to sort of leave this and see what the landscaping does. But I don't know how to get there. What I would suggest is, they start some landscaping and do the landscaping, and we revisit this in a year or something like that. And then, Allison, how do we get there?
Well, the problem is, I believe this issue is because you want to get an occupancy permit, correct? And if you don't have an occupancy permit, there's all sorts of issues, things called insurance, things called your mortgage, everything else. So I don't think it's fair at all. And if there hadn't been the unfortunate accident of the foundation being 18 inches in the wrong place, the question of massing and color and everything else would never be coming up.
That's correct.
So the question is, and I think the unfortunate incident, the survey was not required when it should have been, when it would have been easy to fix the problem. So I'm quite happy to approve the variance as is, without plantings and without paint color.
Maureen?
I'm not bothered by the roof or by the color of the house either. I do share Councillor Hawkins' concern about the landscaping proposal being prepared by an arborist, well-respected arborist, but not by a landscaping professional per se. And I'm wondering, Emma, because I really would like this off our desk.
Okay.
I'm wondering if there's any possibility of building into the special terms and conditions of the variance permit, something that deals with the concern of the plan being reviewed by a professional and taking into account fire smart practices, something. We've got 6 conditions here on the variance. Is there the potential for a 7th or revision to the 6th one to address the concern about this not being prepared by a landscaping professional?
We could put that as a condition, that the plan be be reviewed and approved by a landscape designing professional. There is a certification in BC, so I can get the wording for the specific certification for landscape design. And to use fire smart trees. That would definitely be
To recommend using them. I mean, there are many homes on Bowen that have totally non-fire smart trees, so it seems a bit much. I'd be prepared to support this with that addition.
Yeah. I think, Gary, that I'm going to echo the other 2 sentiments, because in fairness to the people they need to move on with their lives, to be honest, and I don't see that going round and round like laundry in the dryer here is going to help us particularly. And if a stipulation that the landscaping meets the requirements, and I think Councillor Nicholson has said it adequately, then I'm all for moving it ahead and let these good folks get on, get their house completed and all the things that they need so they can satisfy their neighbours to the best of their ability and frankly move on with getting their house completed and moved in.
So I'll first and then.
Yeah, I would support that as well. Not because I don't care about paint color and things like that, because it's none of our business. I think we're land use regulations, which includes setbacks. And the rest of the issues here about materials and paint colors and surfaces and those kinds of things refer to design guidelines that are approved by the developer. It's not for us to comment on those things, and I did note in some of the information that in the covenant between the landowners and the Bowen Island properties, that there is an ability for the residents to form an association and manage these things themselves. But it's not the Bowen Island municipality's responsibility, and I think I also noted that there's only 3 properties undeveloped at this point. So I would also just like to note that if people didn't choose to build buildings that completely filled the building envelope right up to the setbacks, I know there's things like rock outcrops and things like that, but if people chose to give themselves some leeway and in terms of not building right up to the setbacks and chose to take the recommendations of getting surveys and things like that, it can save a lot of problems. And that being said, this happens to other people too, and so I'm prepared to support it with the landscaping provision of the qualified professional landscaper.
Emma, first, sorry.
I'm not 100% sure, but I do believe council would need to specify the amendment to the DEP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maureen?
In public comments, the owners mentioned release of security, and that's mentioned in point 6 here. There is no security required under this.
It says TBD.
To be determined.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the time the permit was being prepared, I needed to verify some pricing. So the pricing I have based on the plans that are proposed and the pricing that was received from the applicant for the work to plant the trees and install a retaining wall should be about $12,000.
And the security deposit, I assume, is the deposit that's sitting with the building department right now for a building permit, which they need an occupancy permit to get. And if I'm understanding the applicant's submission, they need that money to do the planning. So we've got this catch-22.
When I inquired with the building department, there was no security taken for landscaping as part of the.
No, but there, when you apply for a building permit, you have to put down a deposit, which you get back when your occupancy permit
I'm just saying
is
it
issued.
would be separate from this deposit.
So you want an additional deposit of $12,000.
It would be a letter of assurance,
Mhm.
and it would be at 125% of the estimated cost, so that would bring it to 15,000.
I don't have a problem with that. How do we make this turn us into a
I
resolution?
think what we might be able to do through the chair is in item number 5, I'm on page 74 of 336. If we insert some words into this, such as landscaping as shown on Schedule D shall be approved by a qualified landscaping design specialist, and we'll check on the words. And shall be completed, and then just continue on from
Continue.
there.
Keywords there.
I'm not sure you want to say as shown on Schedule D, because it might be
Yeah.
changed, so
Yeah. I would do
a
something.
landscaping plan must be approved by qualified landscape.
I was just gonna suggest that it be amended by including a provision for the landscape plan to be reviewed and approved by a certified landscape professional and that part of the SMART principles be considered
But
for the
okay,
variance of.
are you going to change the intro of paragraph 5 then, or is that your total change to paragraph 5?
I'm just suggesting a general change, and the planning staff can amend the final wording with the intent captured in the resolution.
Okay, so you're suggesting that 5 be changed to what you're suggesting? Because we can't leave
Where would it
5
go?
in there
Yeah, actually.
as is. I like what you're suggesting as instead of 5.
Let me just
Yeah,
get there.
I agree.
Delete 5 and
Delete
insert.
5 and replace it with
On
this.
page 2 of the variance permit, there's
Yeah.
condition number 5.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
There should still be reference to the landscape plan, so that we don't come up with a completely different plan that's like one tree.
So this is where, now Hope and I are looking at the same little paragraph. And so this is where, in number 5, Hope, I'm trying to capture this by inserting the words landscaping as shown on Schedule D. I haven't figured out what to do about that.
Shall be-
Shall be reviewed and approved by
A
a qualified, what did we call it, landscape design
A certified
Landscape designer,
certified landscape professional.
just
No.
because an arborist is considered a landscape professional.
So what was your wording?
Landscape designer.
It's designer.
and shall be completed. So how about,
Well, that sort of covers it, doesn't it?
Okay, Hill, can you read the whole thing again? Because I'm still bothered by landscaping shown as on Schedule D.
So it would be landscaping as shown on Schedule D shall be
reviewed and approved?
reviewed and approved by a certified landscape designer.
Could I suggest is subject to a review by a landscaping design specialist?
And does
Just-
that give him lenience to actually make changes to it?
That can also be written into the condition.
I think we know where we want
We
this
know
to
where we
go.
want
Yeah.
But-
Let's let
but-
staff figure it out.
What, no, they need the exact wording, don't they?
I don't think so. I think we're
I think the intent
complicating the
is clear.
situation.
Okay, we don't have to do the
I think-
wordsmithing?
I think we'll leave it to Emma. I'm comfortable with that, but you're the counsel.
I think
As long
words,
as we don't have to, and I'm seeing our CAO nodding.
I think that what council's doing is passing a motion saying that we approve the DVP as recommended with the additional amendment relative to the landscape plan that's to be subject to the approval of a landscape design professional. And with that said, Emma will capture the right wording in the actual DVP permit.
Thank you. Would you
Yes.
like me to read the motion
Yes,
as
please.
amended?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
please.
That council issue development variance permit DVP 06 as amended by including a provision that the landscape plan be subject to a review and approved by a certified landscape designer, and that fire smart principles be considered for the variance of side setback and height for 971 Seaview Place, legally described as Lot 38, BCP 15102, District Lot 489, Group 1, PID 026153548.
Okay. I'll move it.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
I was going to,
Okay, sorry.
well, I'm still concerned about the amount of security, and it having to sit there for a whole year. I mean,
Well, you
nobody's,
gotta go over this stuff.
well, they're not gonna plant dead plants.
Well, the way a letter of assurance would work is we wouldn't cash it unless the work wasn't done by the deadline.
Okay,
So
that's,
not
if
long
that's,
enough.
that's
So you're
the
just looking
intent
for
to
a
gain.
letter
Letter
of
of
credit,
intent.
all right.
Yeah,
Letter of assurance.
And this will enable them to get
Yeah, move ahead.
their occupancy permit, the building permit
Yeah.
inspector's not going to make them wait a year.
No.
That's what it is.
no, good, good
Okay,
clarity.
you in favor, Allison?
Okay.
Thank you. It's unanimous. All right. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. So 5.2, Jennifer Pierce, Ladder 1, Development Variance Permit, 1791 Francis Walk.
Okay, so I'm here presenting the consideration report for 1791 Francis Walk. It's application DVP 12, 2019. The updated items, well, so this application is for the construction of a new house, demolition of existing house, and it's a variance for a setback to the sea from the standard 30 meters to 15 meters. Earlier this afternoon, council visited the site and did a site visit. And during that time, the applicant also walked council through the site and discussed what were the proposed project requests. At that time, there was also submitted 3 plan sheet, or how many is this? 5 plan sheets that contained the same information. It was not a revised plan, but rather just clarified for council use, which we're submitting for record. Also, since introduction to council, we have received additional letters in regards to this project, some of which came in just today. So originally with this project, there were 2 letters from neighbors plus a letter from the Strata submitted. We've since received an additional 4 in support and 1 in opposition.
Can you hear me, Allison?
Yep, you're there. We didn't ask you to vote, and I suddenly realized we had.
I know.
The letters in support are either generally in support or specify view and happiness with the view or lack of having an imposing manner, and the one opposed lists environmental concerns.
All right, discussion. All right. So,
Coming in late, I'm just assuming that we're on
Yeah.
5.2.
yes.
Okay, I just, I remember when the King Edward Bay rezoning or subdivision or whatever it was that was approved, it was a completely different model from elsewhere on Bowen, in that the whole development identified specific building envelopes, all based on views from neighbors and things like that, but especially environmental things and protection of the environment. And anyway, this seems to me to be in line with this, the approach that has been taken. I noted at the site visit today that 4 other properties are within the 15-meter setback as well. And thinking that, as I just said, that setbacks are a major thing, that whole parcel of neighborhood has been planned in a different way. And since when I looked at the pin, it's only a little bit different from where the building, the existing 100-year-old, it's not a 100-year-old building, but the building has been there for 100 years, and the existing older structure is creaking away there at that short distance from the pin. It's not much different, and the environment has already been damaged underneath it, except for that little extension. So I'm not gonna fight this one.
All right.
No, I mean, I supported, having looked at the plans, I thought someone has taken exceptional care in terms of the architecture and general husbandry or wifery of the whole area. I thought there was particular sensitivity to neighbours and also to the environment. It is a challenging lot, and quite frankly, I hope the owners wouldn't mind, but anything has to be an improvement probably on what there is there now, and I hope that won't cause any offence. You know, there's a combination of an ageing building, dying trees, and if I look at form and character for that particular neighbourhood, it seems to me to be particularly consistent with the other properties. So I think it will provide a very interesting building and one that's been done with particular sensitivity, and I support the application.
Would you like me to read the motion?
Sure, let's go.
The council issued development variance permit DVP 12/2019 for the variance of the setback to the sea from 30 meters to 15 meters for consideration of a new house for 1791 Francis Walk, legally described as Lot 6, Block 1, District Lot 1545, Plan B, CS 2587, PID 027294528.
Should be construction, not consideration.
Yeah.
Oh, did I read consideration?
Yeah.
Okay, Michael, a second. Any further discussion? Oh,
I just wanted to mention, also just in terms of the environmental side, the landowners have removed all the broom and invasive species, and they, on asking them, they were able to confidently state, yes, we found some native serviceberry bushes and Saskatoons to some of us, and that kind of thing. So they're aware of the native plants, and they're marshalling that.
I think they're looking after the land very well, and, you know, all the neighbors except for one, we're pretty much in agreement with this, and some of the other areas, as you alluded to in that thing, actually do have the 15-meter setback already, so I think there's absolutely no problem with that. So we'll take a vote, all in favor? Is unanimous. Rob?
Yes, I'm good with that.
Okay, thank you. How about the last one? All right, that is unanimous, thank you. Thanks, Joe. So that's yours.
Oh, I just asked a question at the end. People were hungry now.
Yes.
There was a 5.3, wasn't there?
Why don't we?
No, we do have a 5.3, but let's go ahead with Tina, and then we'll go back to my comment.
Oh, was there something else you were?
No!
Did we jump the queue? No. Are we too excited? You're excited to with your yellow printed sheet.
Yes, that's right.
Your worship, the corporate officer wants to draw to council's attention.
There was an item 5.3 that was included in the on-table package,
Yeah.
but perhaps we could just
Absolutely.
let Tina go and then we can address that after.
That's what Mayor just said.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm
Yep.
glad.
Susan
Sorry for
has
the
to
oversight.
There's a deal.
I'm so excited to see them. I forgot about that.
Tina Nielsen,
Sorry.
Chief Librarian, Bowen Library, and Susan Monroe, Board Chair, Bowen Island Public Library Board.
So,
It's all yours.
you've introduced us, thank you very much. We're very pleased to be here to be able to speak with you about all the latest and greatest from the Bowen Island Public Library. As Carrie has just said, I'm Susan Monroe and I'm the board chair. Tina is our chief librarian. We've got a couple of other board members here also. Michael Penny, who's our treasurer, who is moved right there.
I thought it would be more convenient, but that didn't.
It's worked out just fine. And Len Gilday, also Sue Ellen Fast is on our board, which is, wonderful for us. So let's just, we've made a nice little PowerPoint for you, so let's take that.
Let's figure out the technology.
Let's figure out the technology. There you can see our, the structures that we have, the beautiful old general store and the beautiful new Cove Commons. Ooh, that didn't work out very well.
Hang on.
Have we done something? Oh, thank
Have
you.
you done something? There we are. About 18 months ago or so, we had a strategic planning session led by Carol McKinnon. This is the library board altogether. And we came up with those 5 main areas of initiative. And so we've been busily working away on all of those over the last 18 months or so. As you can imagine, there is a great big long list of tasks under each of those headings, but I'll just give you a quick rundown of what they basically mean. The first one about planning and employing our financial resources. We've always been careful financial planners at the library, dealing with scarce resources and looking carefully for really every source of funding that we can find. And we were recommitting to doing that, and so we have continued to do. Recently getting a grant from the Knick-Knack Nook in order to furnish the Cove Common space. The second thing, of course, has to do with the use of the new space in the Cove Commons. We and staff have been developing some fantastic programs, which you're going to hear about. The effect of those and the reception of those programs, you'll hear about those. Tina will tell you a bit about that. And as I say, we're also furnishing that space to make it more comfortable and acoustically friendly. The third thing has to do refining our positive and professional relationship with BIM. 18 months ago, we didn't, the operating agreement between the Muni and the library was still outstanding. And so we were, to have that finalized just clarifies so many things. And so that's been done now, and that feels great. Enhanced external communications, that we've been doing, we recently completed a survey and some focus groups. Tina's going to talk about that a bit. That's something we're still working on quite actively. And the survey results also reflect that that should continue to be an area of work for us. And then the final thing, the recruitment, retention, training, et cetera, of staff. We have it's no shocker to say that we have a terrific staff at the library, but we want to continue to support them and make sure that our HR policies are in line with those of the Muni, and also that they're compensated properly. Tina. That was
Here and have a look at where, thank you.
I think that might be safer.
You might have noted in your own annual report where some library statistics were included a few months ago, a bunch of these numbers, but we've been tracking since, we track every year, but we've noted, particularly in the last year from 2017 to 2018, a significant growth in use of the library. And of course, we put it down primarily to our new space, the annex. If you build it, they will come, more or less, is what we're seeing. And we're thrilled about that. So actual visits to the library, meaning people walking in the door, has increased 51% 2017 over 2018, or to 2018. The number of materials borrowed is up 10%, and which is not a huge amount, but pretty much across the board, libraries in Canada, circulation, that's materials borrowed, has been on the decline. A little bit every year, everybody has a little less circulation of actual books and materials. So to see ours actually increase by 10% was quite something to see in a year. The number of questions that we answered, so we call those reference questions or whatever directional questions people are asking us, up 30%. The number of adult programs, of course, just stands out as this ridiculous, huge number increase. But that's because before the construction of the Cove Commons, we had nowhere to do programming. So we had very little programming. It was primarily children's programming that happened, and we just didn't have an opportunity. So now we do, and that's why we built it. We built it so that we could provide programming, and we have done so, and increased that amount quite significantly. Kids programs, children's programming is also up 47%, and new library members. So every year it increases a little bit more, probably as our population increases. We have new library members, and but there was quite a growth between 2017 and 2018. So one of the things that we have, Susan mentioned, is our communications was to consider what the public would like to see in our new building. So one of the things that we decided when we did our strategic planning was to keep it fairly short term, partly to give everyone a little bit of a break after 4 years of a lot of work to build this space, not to set huge, huge goals, but also to let the new space sort of have its time and let the public come and use it and get a feel for it, and then go and ask them, go and talk to the public and say, what do you see in this space now that it's been here for a year? What would you like to see happening? What works, what doesn't work? So we had an online survey, but we also decided that it was really important to do focus groups. Surveys are really great to get a broad spectrum across as many people as you can, but they're often answers that are sort of yes, no, let me tick a box, I don't really want to go too deeply. So a focus group allows you to really get people to think a little bit more, kind of blue sky visioning, and think about other things. You can give them feedback, and they can, you can give them suggestions and they can give you feedback. So it's just a more dynamic process, and definitely lets us get a little deeper into what people would like to see. There's also been lots of studies that sort of say, a well-chosen focus group that represents a demographic of your population is as good as if you went out and tried to interview everyone in that same demographic. You really do get a good sense of what people are looking for. So we did 3 focus groups. We had hoped to do a 4th, but it was summer and it just didn't come to pass. But we did have a focus group with youth, and the youth told us they were great. They told us if the library is a great space for getting media, for meeting people. It's very important to them that the library is central, accessible, and safe, and that it is a welcoming environment. They talked quite a bit about the fact that it's a trusted, safe space, both for the materials that are there, but also for the building itself. And in fact, said, they would love to use it more in evenings or to meet with friends. It's close to the ferry if their West Vancouver friends are coming or going. So that was a really great piece of information for us to get from youth. They also talked about the physical collection still. You think that the 12 to 18-year-olds would be all about just the internet, but they weren't. They were about having the physical collection as well. Community group representatives, so we invited a number of people from local community groups, and they said, that the library is very useful for lending of various things, not just the books. Some of you, well, most of you know we have the med shed where we lend medical equipment. We have a number of other things that we lend out, radon detectors, power monitors, thermal cameras, etc. And that they very much supported the sharing economy, which I love that modern term, sharing economy. I think libraries have been sharing economy for hundreds of years. And community groups also really value our community meeting space in this new building. Seniors told us the library is really important for curated information, so again, that's sort of trusting that what you're going to see there has gone through some sort of process where it can be trusted, unlike fake news and lots of things on the internet. And also the gathering space is a really important part for all these groups, but seniors as well, for human connection, and free, open, democratic, accessible to all, which of course is the pillar of public libraries. So we did an online survey. We had 349 respondents. What we were asking them was, what would you like to see in the annex, as well as, tell us about the services you're familiar with and what you feel about them, or what suggestions you have. So library programming was, when asked what would you like to see in the annex being the library half of the Cove Commons, was programming for adults and children. That was sort of the top rated thing that people suggested. And they gave suggestions of what they would like to see that programming, and it came out absolutely that educational programs related to books, literacy, literature, and programs for children and youth, which really wasn't a big surprise to us, but it was quite heartening to have that confirmed somewhat. Our collections were rated as excellent or good by 69% and fair or poor by 24% of survey respondents. So we have a small collection in a small space, and the next slide will talk a little bit about what people said. Most frequently asked for improvement. Actually, on that little graph, you'll see the very longest bar says no improvements needed. So the largest number of people actually responded, you're fine, we don't need you to improve anything. But I think that's why we do focus groups, so you can dig a little further in. The next biggest request was the collections. So our collections of books and DVDs and materials were what people throughout the survey in a number of different places said, you need more books, you need to keep more of them, you need a bigger space for them, you need more collections, which is also heartening and somewhat surprising in this day and age, but there we go. So increased hours of operation. Well, we did ask about hours, and a number of people, quite a significant portion, said your hours are good. They sort of all recognized you're a small library in a small community with a small budget, your hours are pretty good. But if you were going to expand hours, we'd really love Mondays. And we'd really love you to be open in the evenings more. So, and then another thing that came up over and over again was many people, because we listed, here's all the services we have, how many do you know, how many have you used, and lots of people said, I didn't know you did that. I didn't know you had that. You had that? I didn't know you do that. So clearly communication is something we need to continue working on. External communication. Go ahead. Okay. Thank you. And then overall we had, those nice questions like, do you value the library, or how valuable is it, and how do you rate our service, and how do you rate various aspects of our service? And really our respondents were enormously positive, and 98% agreed or strongly agreed the library is a valuable resource in our community, and 91% rated us as excellent or good in service as well as customer service in that rating. So we just had to throw in those good numbers at the end there. And then there were quite a number of open-ended questions, which of course is a great way to get really good response, but takes an enormous amount of time to siphon through and try and distill it into some useful information. So I've just grabbed 3 comments that kind of represent a lot of the other comments, which is, I love the first one, a meeting of minds and interests in a community. So these are direct quotes, honestly, I haven't changed them. People who value the books and the services related to books, and then the fact that it's free. And it's my own personal, very strong belief about public libraries, that their greatest value is that they're free and open to everyone. And so I just put that one in because I think it's a really important part of public libraries.
Are you sure you didn't add?
I did not take the survey.
You didn't add an exclamation point in that one?
No, I didn't. It was a so there you go.
So we have completed our 2020 budget, and if we haven't submitted it already,
It's getting there.
it's very, very close. And so what you are going to be seeing in that, we are going to be asking for a small increase in our operational budget to support programming on the one hand, and also to bring our staff salaries in line with those of the municipality and the comparative communities that were the compensation report that had been done a couple of years ago. We need to bring our salaries in line with that. So that's will be reflected in those numbers. As I say in the final bullet, we do value very much our effective relationship between the library and the municipality, and the operating guidelines, as we say, are a very good example of that. Also, we are tremendously grateful to you for passing your recent resolution to support the initiative of the BC Library Trustees Association, trying to get the provincial government to support provincial libraries more than they have been doing. I think they've been falling behind in that respect, and they certainly do need a reminder, and we're grateful for your support of that.
I just wanted to second Susan's comment about the great relationship between the library and the municipality, because I speak to lots of librarians in lots of other libraries in the Lower Mainland, big, small, medium. Not every library has quite this wonderful of a relationship between themselves and their municipality. So I just wanted to express my gratitude that I am invited to be involved with staff events and managers meetings, and that doesn't happen in every library, so I am quite grateful and really appreciate that we have that communication going, so thank you for that.
I'm going to just see if I can do this. No.
Maybe there's one more.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you for your support. That's a slide, but also, if you have any questions, we'd be very happy to answer them.
Anybody have any questions?
It's really just a good news
That was a
story.
great presentation.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks. Yeah. Okay, so just before we move on, we're gonna flip back to 5.3. And you can see on table, and Dennis will speak to that. Thank you.
This one, right?
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Council, back on September 30th, you considered the issue of the fire department and the need to conduct a core service review, could otherwise be referred to as an audit. There was a motion passed at that time that a core service review be undertaken, and that motion was subsequently brought forward to the open meeting on October 15th, as I recall, and ratified and made public at that time. So staff have now acted on that direction from council. We've gone out and got advice from some fire service experts as to who in the business, who's in the business of conducting these kind of reviews, people that we could turn to get this kind of service. And the name of David Mitchell and Associates came up, and he is recognized in the fire industry as somebody that is very knowledgeable, very experienced to do these kinds of reviews in large and small communities. He has sent us, so we spoke to him, and he is willing and available to start that task very quickly. He's got, like I say, he sent us a history of the work he's done, and it just goes on for pages. He's probably done 100 of these across the province, so it's David Mitchell, and he's got people that work with him as well. So he's got a small team, and we're prepared to approve his engagement. He's prepared to start immediately, and you'll see the last part of the, or the second last part of the motion is that we're authorizing the mayor and myself to work out the details of the service agreement or contract, and to execute that with him. But it is in keeping with council's direction, and I would recommend the motion as presented.
Questions?
I'm just prepared to make the motion.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, that Dave Mitchell and Associates Limited be appointed to undertake the core services review of the BIM Fire Department as approved by council on September 30th, 2019, and that the mayor and chief administrative officer be authorized to enter into a service agreement with Dave Mitchell and Associates Limited to undertake this work on behalf of the municipality, and further that the BIM purchasing policy be waived to permit direct sourcing of this service.
Second. Okay, second over to David. Any further discussion? Allison?
Well, I have to put my finance hat on.
Yeah.
You found a space in the budget for this?
I am going to be working on a financial plan amendment, so I will find funding source for this, yes.
So I think we then have to add, if there is no funding source, then we have to direct the chief financial officer to amend the financial plan accordingly.
I don't know if you need to add that
Well, it's not
provision to the
budgeted for,
resolution, because
and
part,
we haven't got a pot that it's gonna come out of, so.
because it would be my responsibility to ensure that we have a provision in the financial plan as I bring the amendment forward. So I don't believe you need a resolution for that, but if,
I would be much more comfortable since we can't spend something we haven't budgeted for, and there's no budget pot adding any, and that the chief financial officer be directed to amend the financial plan accordingly.
So you're offering that as an amendment?
Yes.
I will move that as an amendment.
All right, second that. All in favor of the amendment? Okay, that's it. Rob?
Vote to vote on that?
In favor?
In favor of
Well,
the
it's
amendment,
unanimous now.
Okay,
of the amendment to the motion, not the main motion.
yeah, okay, I'm okay with that.
Okay, thank you. So, any further discussion?
Just, I'm assuming that the service agreement will outline the timeline in more detail as well as
Absolutely.
the
That's
cost.
the scope.
Yes,
Scope
absolutely, and I
timeline.
can tell you the intention is to start as quickly as possible
Mhm.
and to keep it tight and not let it drag out.
And will the service agreement come back to council?
No, that would be, you're authorizing the mayor and myself to complete that on behalf of council.
But it would definitely come back to council, yes, of course.
Not
For information.
No, sorry, Dave.
For information, yeah.
For the information, yeah.
We'll certainly brief you on that at a subsequent meeting.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. All right, so I'll ask a question, all in favor? Thank you. Rob?
Yeah,
In favor, okay, thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, it's 5.3, I believe. So, Raj Hayre, Chief Financial Officer, Community Organization, multi-year core funding applications.
oh, thanks. Oh, maybe 3 slides, oh, thank you. So I'm gonna give you, you've got a report in front of you for, that has the details of the multi-year core funding, but I've put a few PowerPoint slide presentations just to give you a little bit of background. So we have a budget provision for grant funding of $140,000 in our 2019 budget. I believe that amount has remained at 140 for a number of years. Council has approved for 2019 $97,500 in multi-year core funding agreements. Actually, 3 organizations requests totaling $97,500. Again, those 3 organizations are the Museum and Archives, the Bowen Islands Art Council, and funding provided to Community School Coordinator. That leaves $42,500 available for the Community Grants Program. In 2019, grants were awarded to 13 organizations. There were 15 applicants with a total request of $77,000. Grant amounts ranging from $500 to $13,000 were awarded to these organizations. The bulk of the grants were in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. So this is just to give you a little bit of background of the budget provision that we have for grants. In terms of the 2019 multi-year core applications, we received 2 applications, one from Tourism Bowen and another one from Bowen Island Resilient Community Housing. The applications were received in July and they were reviewed with the Finance Committee at the last Finance Committee meeting. In terms of the requests, the request from Tourism Bowen was for $38,000 for funding in 2020 and $44,000 in funding for 2021. There is currently a service agreement in place that with Tourism Bowen and a $15,000 budget provision in our operating budget, which leaves a funding shortfall in the budget of $23,000 in 2020 and $29,000 in 2021 for the Tourism Bowen application for multi-year core funding. Bowen Island Resilient Community Housing has requested core funding of $32,000 in 2020, $28,000 in 21, $24,000 in 2022, and $20,000 in 2023. Coming back to the 2020 request, given that we're going to be entering into the budget, we're working on the budget right now. The additional requested funding is $55,000 in 2020, which would represent an approximate 1% tax rate increase. So we currently do not have funding available to award the multi-year core funding requests. As I mentioned previously, the applications were reviewed with the Finance Advisory Committee at the last Finance Advisory Committee meeting, and the recommendations in to council are again, they're based on the fact that they're based on the recommendations of the Finance Advisory Committee, and also based on the fact that the currently available budget provision for multi-year core funding requests is not in the budget. So the request is to award Tourism Bowen Island Island's request to amount of limited to an amount of $20,000 a year for 2020 and 2021, and that an award for multi-year core funding to Birch not be awarded at this time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Raj. So we're going to start.
Yeah, I understand the rationale, but the work that Birch is doing is critical to what we all want to achieve on Bowen. And when I look at our core funding and I see that that's not in there, I understand why it's not in there, but not logically. But in terms of what we're trying to do, we do need some funding for operations. We're getting, as we've heard, we're getting some grants to actually do some really good work. We need to have somebody else to do some operations work. So I'm not sure what to do here, but I'd like to see some sort of a compromise where we get some money for Birch. Yeah.
Could you remind me, Raj, in prior years when Tourism Bowen Island has received its funding, what was the source of that?
It is that funding comes from the tax levy, so they're basically.
Not the grants budget.
Pardon?
Not the grants budget.
No, sorry, the funding source is, for the entire grants budget is funded through taxation revenue.
Right. Correct.
But this would be the first, if we were to accept the recommendation regarding Tourism Bowen Island, this would be the first time that those funds have come out of the.
Grant funding, that's correct. So what I would do is I would move that 15,000 provision that is currently in the operating budget into the grants funding area, and we would have to top that up by another $5,000.
And the report also indicates that there was some uncertainty on the part of the Finance Committee about whether Birch and Tourism Bowen Island were appropriately characterized to be eligible for multi-year funding.
Can I try and answer that?
Yes, please.
From the case of Tourism Bowen, it was a service agreement for services rendered, and I think the feeling of the Finance Committee, if I agree, was that it belonged where it was as a separate service agreement for a service that we wanted to see performed. And a lot of municipalities do fund the visitor information. So we were having trouble understanding why it should be moved into the grants budget in the first place. And with Birch, I think it was a little bit the same way. If it's a service, is it a service that other municipalities normally provide? And if it is a service we want provided, then we want to see a little more detail in an operational budget, so understanding the difference. So I think with Birch, we might suggest maybe we should have a meeting with Birch and the Finance Committee to sort of, they want to see more, committing to multi-year when you don't know that this project is going to get off the ground versus, on a year by year, but just more detail as to how the operations budget was calculated, worked out, and that kind of thing, I think. in the future. They weren't saying absolutely no, not never.
So,
I think from reading the reports, it looks to me like this letter, October 23rd, came in after the financial committee met. And this is the letter that reports on the grants that Birch has received. So that we've been able to, one way of looking at it is for our defined need. I would just like to say that the affordable housing was one of the top 2 issues on the OCP update, which is back in 2010. And I think, you know, throughout, we know we've got this affordable housing need. It's a huge need, and now is like a 40-year window where projects and funding is actually available. And finally, we have a group that has come forward of volunteers who are at this moment finding grant money, project money, 91,000, or if I got that number correctly, 91,642. So that seems to me to be pretty good leverage, a good investment of $10,000 in the operational funding that we did earlier, and that's where the need is. So I support more funding for Birch, at least for 2 years, if not the 4. And I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, Raj, but I thought that Tourism Bowen had been receiving 15,000.
That's correct.
yeah,
Right.
that's great.
And so, you know, not to pit these 2 wonderful groups against each other, but Tourism Bowen also has the use of the cottage, the Caring Circle Cottage, which is a municipal building. Birch is, you know, working with us to define some space in the community lands, similar in those ways. I just, the Tourism Bowen is looking to expand and improve. Birch is trying to get a huge, big project off the ground, and they're being successful in finding this grant money. So my support is stronger for Birch if a decision between them has to be made.
So, you finish?
Yeah.
Because I take Sue Ellen's point, and I'm trying to not, and you said it, pit one against the other. So tourism, Vancouver, in my way of thinking, was got its 15,000. It was a fee for service. If it wasn't being done by Bowen Tourism, we would have had to have taken it on and do it. And quite frankly, I would rather, and when you look at the increase in their numbers, which are rather like the library, which are astronomical, and maybe they're tied together, you know, really, I wonder where some of our confusion is in grant funding. Because I would rather see the Bowen Island Tourism saying, hey look, given the numbers, and we've seen the numbers in 2019, and we saw what they were in 2015, and we've seen how they've grown. If they are to provide a certain service and they need a certain amount of money, I would rather see it done on a fee for service, the total amount, because it's not a grant funding. Your grant funding, I think, was intended for items coming out of the special needs, or people were being innovative, and they were looking, and I think the grant funding should be a maximum of 5,000, and it's for smaller amounts, because when I saw, Raj, you said the largest amount was 13,000, well, we only have 40-something. You don't need many 13,000s to realize very quickly mathematically the people at the bottom of the list here are in for a pretty slim deal. So actually, I actually like to see our system, frankly, overhauled, because hey, Bowen Island tourism, what it needs, because it does a job, and put it in that line and take it up all this grant funding. And for Birch, for the exceptional work they're doing on something, and then please, if we could separate the two, I think I'd be kind of grateful, because I think they are separate. For Birch, outstanding organisation who are, if you like, dealing with the issue of the day. So it's not really, it is maybe more applicable for grant funding, but let's support them as we need, and then maybe that amount comes off the grant funding, and maybe there isn't the same amount for grant funding next year, and we don't make a provision for grant funding. but let's give these people some certainty so they know where they're doing, because tourism, Bowen Island certainly can't plan without certainty. And I think if you speak to Birch, they're probably very similar right now. So they're looking for a degree of certainty. So I'm not sure the grant funding is the right mechanism. If they need it and we're prepared to do it, let's do it. And if we end up by doing less grant funding, and we have a few 5,000s that we can give out for special stuff, whatever comes forward, fair enough. But I'd like to see security offered to these two organisations, and to make sure, if we could, to keep them separate.
Maureen, just for a sec. Yeah, we have an essential problem here, is that the way this was set up, the core funding comes out of our grant money for the year, and it's very simple. It's $140,000, and by the time it gets down to the community, now we're down to $40,000, as Raj explained. I think there has to be an essential change of how this has to be more of a line item on the budget.
That is what I'm proposing for future years, Mayor, is if we go back to this slide here,
Yes.
we should no longer have a $140,000 number. We should have a $97,500 number, which is the amount available for multi-year core funding, and that's why I've broken it out this way, because this is the way in practice Bowen Island has done this for the past few years. And then the $42,500 is available for community grants programs. And small community grant programs are defined. So that program is reviewed by the grant, what is our committee called? Community Grants Committee.
Yeah.
And whereas the multi-year core funding program would be reviewed, in my opinion, by the Finance Advisory Committee, because it's not a allocation of funds, it's typically going to be a request for additional funding, which will come through taxation revenue as the funding source.
And the other thing, one of the parts of the core funding application is that it would normally be paid for by the municipality or the township or whatever it happens to be.
Tax revenue pays for it.
Sorry?
Tax revenue pays for it.
But what would,
Oh, you mean
but
the
what
services
normally, the
are
services
provided by the
would normally be
Yeah.
provided by the municipality, in our case, the municipality. So, we look at Birch, and obviously the work they're doing is absolutely fantastic, and they have to have the ability to carry on. But they're not really a housing authority. It would be interesting to see, and there are some incidents where the municipality does get involved with the sort of seed funding to get these things off the ground. So that's a dilemma we're dealing with. I would like to see us, I think Birch is going to be all right till the end of the year. I would like to see us put something into the next year's budget, or straighten out the situation we have here before the end of the year, so that they can have a reliable funding source going forward. Maureen?
I think we need to reorganize our buckets. I don't think there's anything wrong with the multi-year core funding for the organizations that currently receive that.
Okay.
I think community grants is fine, and the organization at the high end is the caring circle. And we know that that's the caring circle.
Yes.
There's another bucket here that Tourism Bowen Island and Birch are trying to be a part of. And they're going to multi-year core funding because they think that that might work. We need another bucket. Tourism Bowen Island, Birch can be part of that. I don't know what it's called. They're looking for multi-year something. It's not a multi-year service agreement for both of them, but it's a multi-year something. And what's distinctive about that bucket is that those are the two folks who are likely going to be funded in the future, in part through the MRDT. And that is a coherent way of thinking about this new category. And then you don't have, because I mean, we're turning ourselves around trying to figure out how they fit or don't fit into multi-year core funding. They don't. There's something else.
No, and theoretically, Birch, when they get on their feet, they're not going to need this. It'll just be, self-funding and that sort of thing. Whereas probably Tourism Bowen Island will probably need funding for the foreseeable future.
What I was going to suggest, since we're not talking about funding for this year, 2019, we're talking about 2020,
Yes.
is, and I mean, Tourism Bowen has had a service agreement, written agreement every year, so there's nothing wrong with turning a service agreement into a 2-year agreement or a 3-year agreement. But
That's what audits come in.
at this point, I don't know that we need to deal with the motions the way they are, more to deal with them on the basis of refer it back to the finance committee and the CFO for consideration in the development of the 2020 to 2023 financial plan. And we can meet with Birch and try and explain what sort of budgets we're looking for that separates operations from fund capital, because I'm looking in Robin's letter, and she does talk about contract drafting and review by legal counsel. Well, if that's building a facility, that's a project cost, not an operating cost. So deal with, so that would be my recommendation at this point, that we fund it back to the finance committee and the CFO for consideration and development of the 2020 budget. With direction of trying to figure out how to make we haven't done any work on the MRDP either, so we don't know how much money we might even get or how long it's going to take to get.
Yeah, well, let's just pretend that money isn't gonna come at all, and how are we gonna deal with it if it doesn't? And I think there has to be an overhaul of the granting system.
I agree
And
with
I
that.
think we've got to put it in silos. And if there's some line items that have to go in the budget, then they gotta go into the budget.
Well, that's what I'm saying, and
Yeah.
there, and I think that's what Maureen's trying to say, is these two things aren't grants.
No.
There's
Yes,
something
correct.
different, and Tourism Bowen Island has been for the last 10 years, a service agreement.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, they seem to think they want to be in port funding. I haven't understood why. And there's no harm, you can have a service agreement for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I kind of like the idea of a service agreement. Why isn't BYLAWS in a service agreement? You know,
well,
is it
they
a
were
port
always
fund?
treated as a grant. So,
Yeah, well, I
But-
don't know, I think it's time for somebody to look at it.
Yes, I-
Oh,
and
we
they're
do
Right.
have a service agreement
As a
with
result.
BYLAWS as a result of the award.
That's right.
So any organization that council awards multi-year court
Court
funding
funding
to,
has
we
a
have a
service.
service agreement
Okay,
with.
thank you.
I thought so, yeah.
Okay. Raj, do you have anything? I mean,
I think Councillor Moore's recommendation was quite reasonable, that this be referred to the 2020 budget process, and also back to the Finance Advisory Committee.
and I think they have to be prepared to look at the way we're doing business in the whole grants situation.
Well, that's fine.
And then I mean, council will have to make the decision when you're
Yeah.
considering the
Yeah.
2020 budget in terms, because it will likely be one of the 2020 budget pressures or part of the proposed tax rate increase for 2020. Because we can't approve, in my opinion, you can't approve the multi-year core funding if you don't have a funding source for it. We currently do not have a funding source for these requests.
Absolutely, 100%, I agree, Raj. Yeah, that's the bottom line on it, is we can't have multi-year core funding if we don't have the money for it. And not if it's gonna go to, the community grants, what's left of the community grants. So there has to be a substantial change here. And I think the start is by going back to the advisory committee.
So do you need a motion?
We do need a motion.
I've got something to read it.
Sure.
That council refer the multi-year core funding applications from Tourism Bowen Island and Bowen Island Resiliency Community Housing to the Chief Financial Officer and Finance Advisory Committee for consideration in the development of the 2020 budget process.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
straightforward.
David, do you, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? That is unanimous. Rob?
Rob?
Yep, I'm good with that.
Okay, he's good with that. All right. So we didn't do more with that, but.
No, it's an excellent thing that they're going to have a look at.
So we've got the e-ports of committees, councils, and commissions.
Yeah, something happened in the photograph.
Councilor Huck.
Okay, we're an hour behind
Transportation
the time,
Department.
so I'll be quick as I
Thank you.
can. I think it's you can, if anyone clicked on any of the links, you could see that Calgary has a bylaw where you have to give a meter. The hub suggests 1.5 liters. Calgary says a meter if it's below 60 kilometers an hour. For me, most of you know, I've been riding my bike for years. I commuted from various parts of the city, and I often found the most dangerous part of the ride was coming up from Cove, going up that hill. Because the cars are all passing you, and some of them wait, but hardly any do. And they just come right by your handlebars, and it's really tricky, and quite nerve-wracking when you're going to get hit. So, and we've had this conversation in the Transportation Advisory Committee. There's a bunch of bicycle riders there, and they all feel the same thing. One idea is to get one of those, pool noodles that
Oh, yeah.
strap it on the back of your bike and have it stick out a meter so the cars see it. And I think that's a good idea. If you have a bylaw like this, you need to sort of show people what it actually means.
That'd be pretty funny.
It would be pretty funny, but it is dangerous on our roads, and we don't have a bike path yet.
No, I agree. I mean, I just looked at 1 meter and I just went, ugh. I did people 3 meters.
Yeah, I wait and then go right the other lane.
Well,
I'm just going to speak in favor of this motion, partly because of school children. There are more kids that want to ride to school and more parents that want their kids to ride to school. And we've got the new bike park. We're stimulating that. And I think it doesn't say whether it should be 1 meter distance or whatever in this. It says that it be a standard.
Yeah.
And I think a standard for Bowen is appropriate because some places, because all of our speed limits are lower than 60 for one thing, but also because some places we have those ruts beside the road because of the narrow pavement and the vehicles have gone off. And there's going to be other things that people need to think about, but safety of the most vulnerable, I think, is the most important. So I'm in favor.
it kind of surprises me. I don't know about the enforcement part of it, but
I agree.
that's obviously going to be tough. But I think people on Bowen are generally pretty good. Like you say, you're riding your bike all the time. You probably see some pretty horrific stuff too.
Yeah.
So
Setting an
I'm
expectation, though.
taking in favor for this. I'm not going to read the whereases, but I'll read the end of it. Therefore, be resolved that council directs staff to consider including a passing cyclist section in the Bowen Island Municipality traffic and use of streets bylaw.
Thanks, I'll move that, unless you did it. Gary did.
I moved it, you seconded
I seconded
it.
it.
All in favor?
There we go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob.
Yes.
Just starting to pick up the votes here, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay, so new business.
Do we do the ones we pulled?
Well, let's just start with 10.1 and then we'll just jump
Okay.
through.
All right, update on this and a few things. Where's my list? Oh, yeah. So there's a budget meeting there was a budget workshop for Metro Vancouver, and the things that I talked about, they got passed. Long discussion for some of them. And this was the $4 million going into housing, and they'll be putting out a request for proposals or a request for interest, or some sort of a statement like that, going to the municipalities, looking for municipalities who have land that's available, and also potentially nonprofits. So they do a joint venture with a municipality to put up some Metro Vancouver housing. Their housing is 30% is based on income. The other 70% is sort of somewhat below average. That's how that works. The other thing is $4 million a year for parks acquisition. And so that's $4 million and then another 4 and another 4 for 5 years, so $20 million. And this is because, and Maureen can speak to this, but the parks recognition that they're way behind in terms of, and some of the most fiscally responsible councils and directors were saying is, we're asking people, we're getting 35,000 or so people coming every year, we're asking them to live in apartments and townhouses rather than single family homes to keep a more dense community. We need parks for people to get out in, and so everyone's sort of agreeing to that. So those were, the budget, it still goes, this Friday is the actual budget agreement, but after it went through the workshop, it's doubtful that it would be changed. There was also the Climate Action Committee. There was, something there three things. UNESCO passed a recommendation to be signed by Metro Vancouver. The Community Energy Association, we're being encouraged to use heat pumps. I tried going through the heat pump information and try to find a way to get some money for it. It's too complicated. I couldn't figure it out. and I'm reasonably smart. The CEA recognizes that there's all kinds of trouble, so they've done some agreement with Metro Vancouver where they're going to try to work together to come up with a better approach that's more user-friendly so people can figure out how to apply for heat pump money. Open air burning. The way open air burning is supposed to work right now is everyone needs to get a permit, and it takes too long and it's too complicated. So instead, they're just trying to set a bylaw where if you want to do some open air burning, bigger than tiny twigs, you put your name in and get yourself as someone who's doing this. You don't need to get a permit each time. You just have to fit within a bunch of parameters, and it'll be based on complaints and so on if they don't follow them. So that was basically it. Oh yeah, one more thing. I made a recommendation that will be going to the board that the BC government adopt the same zero emission by 2050 target that the federal government has and we have and Metro Vancouver has.
Okay, awesome, great. Well done, thank you, David. Island Trust, Fast and Kale.
Well, I'll be really quick. I just wanted to let people know that in this budget, on section 12.6D in the information items, is the part 3 of the municipal tax levy analysis performed by the Island Trust's Julia Mobbs. And if you look on page 4 of that, you'll see a few more options for looking at how to potentially reduce the Bowen amount contribution. But that was the culminating 3 reports over the past year. Nothing was inappropriately allocated. Everything was fair that they found. And so you can look through the 3 reports because they're all in there. D and then E and F are the 2 earlier reports. And there's some highlights and things, but I won't go into them. I just wanted to let you know that all the information is collected in here.
Super.
And piggybacking on that, because I agree with what Sue Ellen said, but piggybacking on the last report and the motion that we passed on the 30th of September, we do need to arrange a meeting with Peter Luckett. Now, I'm not sure, and perhaps, Dennis, you could advise me, whether that should be done from you to the CAO, or whether we speak to Peter Luckett direct. So I don't mind either way.
I have more to add. I wasn't going to bring it up unless you did.
Yeah.
But Financial Planning Committee of the Islands Trust did meet last week.
Okay.
And we, as a committee, voted to ask Julia Mobbs for options to reduce the Bowen contribution further. So the work is still ongoing.
Okay.
And I suggest that, well, there will be a good time to meet, and it might be when that report is done.
Maybe a quick telephone call could be held. Maybe a quick telephone call could be held. I will forward you that motion, because I don't suppose you would have it. I will forward you that motion. Maybe we could do a quick telephone call, a catch up between the work that's already going on what's written here, and maybe we can circle our wagons a little here.
Sure.
Avoid the temptation to shoot inwards, and we can probably, we could probably move this along.
Yeah.
I'll help you any way I can. So
Yeah. Thank you.
We'll just keep the conversation going is what we're
Yes.
doing.
Yeah.
All right, Councillor Nicholson, update Council Metro Regional Parks.
We met on the 16th of October, and the bulk of the meeting was given over to discussion of the financial plan and just making sure that the committee understood what was there, and also that we had some plans in the event that the budget did not pass. So we had some fallback thoughts, but fortunately, looks like we won't have to fall back. There was a mention in the manager's report of the completion of the condition assessment for all of the built assets in Metro Parks. So they have over 300 buildings of various sorts throughout the system, and they have gone through them all and assessed conditions, because they haven't done that previously, and they're not quite sure how much funding needs to be allocated to maintenance of the buildings. And it's not just the Crippen cottages, it's just there are a lot of other assets that are in a deteriorating state. With Crippen, the work in the orchard is at the 50% design stage, apparently. And on the other side, the system at Dallas-Kerr, they're about 30% along. But what's interesting is that in the Dallas-Kerr cabins, they've developed an agreement with the local First Nations, the local First Nation, to do joint programming. So we'll hear more about that in the future. That's about it. We had a closed meeting. Things will come out of that at some point.
Thanks, Cory. Allison?
Two things, traffic, in the open meeting, we had a very interesting presentation on the impact of road congestion on bus schedules and bus time.
Right.
And that, I'll send a link to that around because it was quite interesting. They've done deep dives into some of the routes where it's congested, and of course the route the 257 takes from down Georgia Street and through the Lions Gate Causeway and the long Marine Drive is one of the routes that's congested, and it means it's an extra cost because they have to put on extra buses because they can't travel as fast, so they handle the. So it was quite an interesting presentation, and it's too bad that the B lines are supposed to fix it, and of course if the B line had gone to 15th and West Van, it would have helped with some of that congestion. So, and TransLink pays for most of that road cost in the end, the B lines in. The other sad thing is the union gave 72-hour notice today about going out on strike. Doesn't affect our bus route because ours is an on-island route, is a contracted route, so we're fine with that. I did clarify that on Friday. Similarly, when they went on strike the last time, the West Van Transit was not affected because it's a contractor route and not part of the same union. The problem is this time, the 257 is now being operated by Transit, not by West Van Transit. So the last work to rule or rotating strikes or whatever really didn't have a lot of effect on us because the 257 was running and our island bus service didn't work. So they're not anticipating a full-scale walkout, 72-hour notices for Friday. Probably some work to rule and rotating actions, but we won't know until Friday. And on that note, I'll move on to 10.6, which, can I just do that while I'm doing it, while I'm talking, and then I'm done, and then I can go back and House on 4?
Now, just
Okay.
something in what you said. I think we should get something out through safety.
Yeah, well, this just I just got the notice on an email while we were talking here, so they've given it to the media, but I can certainly get, do up something with Sophie tomorrow morning about the fact that it won't impact our bus.
Yeah, that would be good.
On
I'm
island.
sure
Yeah.
people will be concerned, and we're not gonna know if it does, if it affects the 257.
Oh, it does affect the 257 because.
But will it, is it actually?
Well, it all depends on
72
what the
hours?
unions do,
Yeah,
72
well, I
hours. It's
understand
not
that.
gonna, nobody's anticipating.
But are they gonna do the whole system?
No, nobody's anticipating a full-scale walkout.
Yeah.
So, like the strike the last time was rotating and
Yeah.
different areas, but we didn't have to worry about it because the 257 was run by West Coast Transit.
Yeah. Yeah, things change. Okay, so listen, let's go to 10.5.
Sure, it's just quick. This is about the House Sound Forum, which, as you know, is twice a year. Last time Bowen hosted was in spring 2015, and this is an email from Ruth, and she wonders if there's any chance Bowen would want to host the spring or fall 2019 forum. All she needs to know is whether their $3,000 budget is possible. Typically it costs less, but that's the number she suggests. And she worked well with staff last time Bowen hosted spring 2015.
I think we're a little late for that.
Yeah, done it
Must be
2020, sorry.
Yeah.
Very good.
2020, got it.
Gotcha, yes.
Yeah, I don't have a problem.
So it might be nice if, I don't know when our new community center will go.
Huh?
Well, let's just look at the $3,000 for the House Sound Community Forum. I think it's a really
Yeah.
valuable service, and I don't know where the money usually comes from for the $3,000 every once in a while. every once in a while, right? But this is,
Just to answer your question on that, I think that would fall under council strategic initiatives for.
Or our conferences.
Okay,
like
council
the one we
strategic
have.
initiatives.
Very
So-
good.
So, yeah,
so a motion something like that council directs staff to budget $3,000 for, to host the Howe Sound Community Forum in 2020.
I would say the fall, not the spring.
Well,
Would your motion, excuse me, would your motion not want to start with that we extend our willingness or invite them?
Yes,
Extend our willingness to host the event
yeah,
and then budget for it as well.
yeah, very good. You got that, Paul?
makes sense.
Thank you. So I move that.
Thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
second,
Thank you.
all in favor?
Very good.
Yeah,
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
So
So
you want me to
I'll
read
let,
that, or are you guys just trusting that I know that?
We trust.
yeah, we're trusting. Okay. And do you want me, I'll forward you this email if you like, or you can just be in,
Or
I'll
she
just
can send-
answer
I
Ruth and she'll be
I
in
did
touch.
get an email from Ruth, I think it was on the CC, so I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
10.6, letter to Patrick.
Because our new, our MP-elect has been elected,
Yes.
Hope and I prepared a motion, so you just read it, Hope?
Oh, okay.
Allison prepared, I typed. That council sent a letter of congratulations to MP-elect Patrick Wheeler and invite him to meet with Bowen Island Municipal Council.
Oh, wouldn't that be lovely?
I'll move that.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
yeah,
I spoke to him.
Thanks, Rob.
Spoke to him at the House on Forum, and he wants to come and give a presentation to council.
Yep.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Don't
Sure
And we
happy to
also
do that.
sent a thank you to Pamela Goldsmith-Jones.
Oh, that would be,
That's a great idea.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be a very.
I think we sure we haven't done that.
No,
I don't recall
no,
no
no.
motion, no.
That's a good idea.
Okay,
I second that
Hard to
motion.
find address for it.
okay. That sounds
Thank
good.
you for her service to the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah, she's
Okay.
been a great, great advocate for
Yeah.
Bowen.
So I seconded it.
Okay, all in
Too
favor?
bad we can't send her a photo of a cleaned up brand new bay.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got some items out of the list here. So David, you pulled 3.3.
Yeah, and I'll be really quick. This is where we're taking that climate change strategy and sending it to all the array of committees, and it's just direction to staff. I'd like the committee coordinators to include me, so that I could be there and present if needed, but really understand what their issues are, and I've been looking for, any ways to strengthen that document. So that's all. Just ask staff to include me in the invitation, so I will attend as many as I possibly can.
And I have an amendment to suggest.
Okay, go ahead, okay, amendment.
And that would be in number 2 down there
Yeah.
below. Refer for comment the draft Bowen Island 2050 climate change strategy to staff and the municipalities transportation advisory committee. Because we do have Bonnie Brokenshire back now, and our environment person.
In the house.
Yeah, our environment manager, and we also have planning staff who I believe have good suggestions, and maybe other staff as well. And I think it's a good way to
engineering as well.
engage them all,
Yeah.
a good way to engage everybody in climate action, so
Okay,
that's my.
You've got to read it now.
Okay.
You can leave the where out
You
of
can
it.
leave it where.
Yeah. Refer for comment the draft Bowen Island 2050 climate change strategy to the
Well, do number 1 first.
Oh, sorry, number 1, oh yeah, right, of course, this is, 1, recognize that climate change represents an emergency for Bowen Island and commits to developing a strategy to reducing emissions in alignment with the targets to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And refer for comment the draft Bowen Island 2050 climate change strategy to municipal staff and the Municipalities Transportation Advisory Committee, Community Economic Development Committee, Advisory Planning Commission, Finance Advisory Committee, and the Parks, Trails, and Greenways Advisory Committee.
Thank you, David.
Second.
Second there, all in favor?
yeah.
Thanks, Rob.
I'll hope
Okay,
that.
What else do we got?
Hope, we've got 3.9 first.
Yeah, that is, street lighting.
No, hold on.
Yep, this is just checking that ordinary street lighting, well, when we refer something like this, I'm never quite sure if we're sort of approving it or just referring it, but I wanted to just,
Referring.
yeah,
It says referring.
You could add and report back to council.
and report back to council, I think might be the best way to make sure that I'm getting what I want. Yeah,
Yeah.
and also, I just wanted to say, that on 15th Avenue in West Van, as Councillor Morse just mentioned, they've got a nice little solar crosswalk now, like ours, up near the high school.
Yeah,
So pedestrians, people crossing from the bus and that kind of thing. So rather than just street lighting and pedestrian safety, I'm hoping that the possibilities of a solar crosswalk might be considered because, or some kind of crosswalk lighting, because otherwise people live in those apartments and things and don't necessarily, I don't know. Overall street lighting, I think a pedestrian crosswalk might be considered.
yeah, I think there's ways to do it, for sure.
I'm not, I've been here long enough to know, but is this maybe not something that your Transportation Advisory Committee would want to have on their agenda?
So I'm just
Maybe
gonna
as
jump,
opposed to directing the staff?
can I just jump in really quick? Our committee clerk came to me today and said, I see that this is on the agenda. After it was sent to Mayor and Council, it was also sent separately to the Transportation Advisory Committee, the same piece of correspondence. So it's in their realm of awareness, and perhaps we could amend it to have it refer it to them as well, if council says.
Well, I think that, your worship, staff work with the Transportation Advisory Committee. I think the motion with council's agreement should be amended to simply refer to the Transportation Advisory Committee for review and consideration.
And take on Public Works.
Well, Public Works are already at the table.
Not at that committee, not
Okay,
yet.
then, excuse me, and then, and Public Works.
The Public Works and Transportation. Yeah.
To the Transportation
And
Advisory
re-
Committee
and-
and Public
And
Works
refer,
Report back to council.
for review and report back.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody happy with that? Hope you okay with that?
Yeah.
Totally.
Okay, and did we have a first and second around this? First,
I'm with
second,
it.
all in favor?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Okay, it's unanimous. Okay, Hope, back to you
Just
for
quickly amending the.
3.10.
That, I'll just read it out loud. So that council move to a closed meeting immediately following the regular council meeting to discuss items pursuant to sections 91A, C, and B of the community charter. A, being personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. C, labor relations or other employee relations. And D, the security of property of the municipality.
All right, I'll move that. David, I got it for a second.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Rob. So I think we're just about done. Got the edits removed from there. The information center.
Again.
And we have the question period.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
The fire review thing,
Yes.
or for review. Have they done reviews in situations similar to ours?
Of course.
Like where everybody's threatened to quit?
I would say probably every study they did has got its unique set of fact patterns, or unique facts. And is it going to be exactly parallel to ours? Well, maybe not exactly, but there will be machinations that are very similar to what we are experiencing here.
It's not really part of the dispute we're having with the fire hall, if you want to call it that. It's not a part of that. It's just, we had planned to do this a long time ago anyway. This is just a core review of the fire services.
Before the dispute, even like before July 15th?
Yeah.
per se?
Yeah.
So then, will this involve talking with firefighters?
I don't know, I don't exactly know what the scope of it is.
Well, because, I mean, if they're not already still talking to
This
the
is more about operations.
It's about operations, so that wouldn't affect the timeline. per se.
No, certainly they're two totally distinct processes, there's no question. Allison, did you have something?
Well, no, I think, they haven't figured out the terms of the contract. If you look at Dave Mitchell's,
Same.
on the web page, they had extensive experience, different, people that work with them. Some have experience with volunteer halls, some have experience with paid halls. So the group is well experience.
My
But it's
concern.
separate from the mediation we're doing with the firefighters.
No, I get that. My concern there is with sort of how much it's gonna cost. Because, you know, if we're already gonna go on, if this mediation goes on, that's gonna cost quite a bit. And then if this court review goes on, because, you know, they're still waiting to talk to lawyers, that could go on a while too.
Well, no, the core review is totally separate. It doesn't have anything to do with the other process.
No, but if they see it that way, then they might insist on having lawyers too, so I was just wondering if that was taken in. But-
I don't see the two as being related, really.
I would like to jump in on that. I've actually read 5 different core services reviews. 2 of them were written by Dave Mitchell. Part of their methodology of doing the review is actually sitting down and talking to members of the fire department. So I'd be interested to know what the time commitment was for all the volunteers to sit down with Dave Mitchell and his group. Because the time commitment for the firefighters is already quite large with all the training, all the calls that they go to, and dealing with the lawyers as well.
Okay. I accept your comments, thank you, and that'll be up to Dave Mitchell.
How are the firefighters
Sure,
going to find
well-
out what the time
well-
commitment is?
Well,
Is this question?
what? Oh, it is question period. Okay, yeah, sorry.
How are
I'm
the
sorry.
How
I
are the
apologize.
firefighters going to find out what their time commitment is to this core services review?
They'll find out from Mr. Mitchell when he comes in. If there is even a time commitment, it might be, it might be just voluntary if they want to come and talk. Or I don't know what the system is. I'm not doing it.
Well, I've read them because I've been interested in it, but the methodologies are to sit down with members of the fire department. So there is a time commitment for the members of the fire department during one of these reviews.
Can we ask who's speaking, please?
Yeah, sorry, your name?
We're SB.
Oh, Marissa. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know. Obviously, when this thing goes on, there'll be a conversation with the membership, and we'll just say, hey, we're doing this and this and this, and are you willing to join, or if you want, if there's going to be any commitment to talk to people or not, I don't know.
Well, there's a commitment, so.
Well, I don't know. How do you know?
I've read the other core services reviews. I've read core services reviews by David Mitchell. He goes through and talks about his methodology, and his methodology is talking to members of the fire department.
Yeah, I don't know that. I'd have to look at the scope.
Out of respect for members of the department,
Yeah.
we should know what our time commitment is to this.
Yeah, well, you'll find out if there is any. Okay, thank you. Robin?
That was my,
Oh, okay.
my question. And also, hello, to the new CEO.
Yeah, the new CEO, Dennis. Yeah, Dennis back. Okay, so that's, the meeting is adjourned. I think we've done it all, and we'll take a quick break, and then we'll get back into the